Hey there, tonight we're diving into the haunting depths of the Titanic's final voyage, where the truth is not the Hollywood tale you know, but a stark reality of human hubris beneath the icy Atlantic. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. In the bustling shipyards of Belfast, Northern Ireland, the Titanic began its life not as a legend, but as a colossal heap of steel and ambition. Imagine a workforce of about 3,000 men, each toiling away under the shadow of Harland and Wolff's massive gantry cranes, hammering out one of the most ambitious projects of the early 20th century. Here's a ship whose name would soon become synonymous with disaster, yet it was born from some pretty lofty aspirations and a whole lot of cash. We're talking about $7, $5 million in 1912 dollars, which after adjusting for inflation translates to well over $200 million today, enough to make anyone's eyes water, except maybe Elon Musk's. So why build a ship so grand and gargantuan that it needed its own postal code? Enter J. Bruce Ismay, a man whose flair for dramatic proclamations could rival any modern-day influencer. Ismay was the big cheese at the White Star Line, a British shipping company with its sights set on dominating the transatlantic travel scene. With the Titanic, Ismay aimed to outdo his competitors, not with speed, but with opulence. He was less about getting you there fast and more about getting you there in style, decadence oozing from every rivet and porthole. You see, back then, the North Atlantic was the ultimate battleground for shipping companies, a watery highway bustling with liners racing to ferry wealthy passengers and immigrants alike. But the Titanic wasn't just any ship. It was touted as the ultimate in luxury travel, a floating palace with amenities that would make the Ritz-Carlton blush. We're talking an onboard swimming pool, squash court, and even a Turkish bath. Yes, a Turkish bath in the middle of the North Atlantic, because nothing says unsinkable like a good steam session, right? Now, Ismay wasn't alone in this nautical venture. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, was also deeply embroiled in this grand endeavor. Andrews was the brains behind the blueprint and the man with enough engineering know-how to pull it off, or so he hoped. He meticulously planned every detail, from the grand staircase to the watertight compartments that were supposed to keep the ship afloat, even if a few of them flooded. Spoiler alert, they didn't quite work as advertised. Together, Ismay and Andrews were like the dynamic duo of the shipbuilding world, with Ismay providing the vision and Andrews the technical expertise. Their brainchild was a ship that stretched nearly 883 feet in length and weighed around 46,000 tons. Roughly the equivalent of 92 million pounds of floating steel. To give you some perspective, that's more than 10,000 adult African elephants. The Titanic was so massive that it required a custom-built slipway just to be launched, further inflating the already astronomical costs. But despite the lavish construction, the Titanic was not all about luxury and excess. It was also a symbol of human progress, a beacon of technological advancement at a time when the Industrial Revolution had people believing anything was possible. It was an era of innovation and optimism, where new inventions like the automobile and airplane were changing the world. The Titanic was meant to be the crowning achievement of this age, a testament to human ingenuity. Yet, amid all the fanfare and self-congratulation, there lingered the hubris that would eventually lead to its downfall. This ship was marketed as unsinkable, thanks to a clever bit of PR spin that would make any modern marketer proud. The idea was that Titanic's design made it virtually immune to any mishaps, a belief that in hindsight was as misguided as it was bold. The term unsinkable became a double-edged sword, a promise that would haunt White Star Line forever. And what about the economic ripple effect? Well, the Titanic was more than a ship. It was a colossal economic statement. It created jobs, fueled industries, and spurred economic activity in Belfast. The shipyard workers, the steel manufacturers, the fabric upholsterers, all found their livelihoods tied to this maritime marvel. It was a venture that boosted economies and filled the coffers of those who dared to dream big. Of course, not everyone was sold on the idea of an unsinkable ship. Skeptics raised eyebrows at the bold claims, but their voices were often drowned out by the chorus of excitement and the allure of the luxurious maiden voyage. After all, who wouldn't want to be part of history by setting sail on the largest and most luxurious ship ever built? So, the Titanic was more than just a ship. It was a microcosm of the era it was built in, an age of technological triumph and boundless ambition, tempered by a healthy dose of human arrogance. Bruce Ismay's vision, coupled with Thomas Andrews' engineering prowess, gave birth to a vessel that would go down in history for all the wrong reasons. But before it met its icy fate, the Titanic was a symbol of human achievement, albeit one perched precariously on the edge of disaster. As the Titanic prepared to set sail from Southampton on April 10, 1912, the atmosphere was electric, with a blend of optimism and exclusivity. Picture the scene: a floating city of steel and society, about to embark on its maiden voyage across the Atlantic. On board, the social hierarchy was as rigid as the ship's steel hull, with first-class passengers enjoying the kind of luxury that made even the Ritz look like a budget motel. Meanwhile, third-class passengers, mostly immigrants chasing the American dream, faced a very different reality, complete with cramped quarters and communal bathrooms. The Titanic wasn't just a ship. It was a microcosm of the Edwardian class system, floating atop a sea of dreams and disparities. Let's start at the top of the social ladder, where the wealthiest passengers mingled in opulent splendor. First class was a veritable who's who of the era, boasting names like John Jacob Astor Roman IV, one of the richest men in the world, with a net worth equivalent to over $2 billion today. Astor was traveling with his much younger, pregnant wife, a scandalous pairing that surely kept the gossip mills turning faster than the ship's propellers. Then there was Benjamin Guggenheim, part of the famous mining dynasty, and Isidore Straus, co-owner of Macy's department store. These were the kinds of folks who dined on caviar and lobster while discussing stocks and the latest Parisian fashions. First-class amenities included a grand dining room, a smoking room, a reading and writing room, and even a Parisian cafe, complete with waitstaff in starched uniforms. The interiors, designed with a blend of Jacobean and Louis Roman XIV styles, featured rich wood paneling, crystal chandeliers, and plush carpets. But let's not kid ourselves. These luxuries were more about flaunting wealth than comfort. The Titanic was a status symbol, a place to see and be seen, where the cost of a ticket could reach $4, $350 over $100,000 today. For these elites, it wasn't just about crossing the Atlantic. It was about doing so in the most ostentatious manner possible. Meanwhile, down in second class, things were more modest, yet still impressive by contemporary standards. Second-class passengers enjoyed amenities similar to what first-class passengers would find on lesser ships, a testament to the Titanic's grandeur. Here, you'd find teachers, clergy, and other professionals, living in cabins that offered a taste of luxury, minus the gold leaf. Although second-class passengers paid just $65, about $600 in today's money, for their tickets, they still enjoyed the benefits of electric lighting and indoor plumbing, luxuries that many had never experienced at home. Now, let's take a deep dive, metaphorically speaking, into the third-class accommodations. Contrary to popular myth, steerage wasn't some Dickensian nightmare. Sure, it lacked the opulence of the upper decks, but it still offered basic comfort. Third-class passengers paid between $15 and $40, about $370 to $1,000 today, a small fortune for many, but it bought them a ticket to a new life in America. These passengers, largely immigrants from Europe, were packed into shared cabins, often with as many as 10 to a room. They had access to their own dining rooms and shared bathrooms, a far cry from the cattle-like conditions often depicted in films. But here's the kicker. While the Titanic promised luxury and adventure, it also embodied the economic and social disparities of its time. In 1912, the divide between rich and poor was as wide as the Atlantic itself. The Titanic's passenger list was a testament to this chasm, with over 200 people on board, including 324 in first class, 285 in second, and more than 700 in third. The remaining were crew members, each with their own role in this floating drama. The ship may have been a marvel of modern engineering, but it was also a stark reminder of the societal structures that dictated so many lives. As the Titanic steamed away from the dark, the excitement was palpable. Passengers lined the decks, waving to onlookers and bidding farewell to the old world. The ship's engines roared to life, propelling it forward at a steady 22 knots, a speed that emphasized its grandeur, if not its urgency. And while the world watched in awe, the passengers settled into their temporary floating home, oblivious to the icy fate that awaited them. The Titanic was more than just a luxury liner. It was a stage where human stories played out against a backdrop of iron and ocean. There were tales of romance, like the newlyweds honeymooning in first class, and tales of hope, like the immigrants dreaming of a new beginning in America. There were stories of ambition, as entrepreneurs rubbed elbows with aristocrats, and stories of survival, as people from all walks of life were about to face the unthinkable together. So, as the Titanic glided across the Atlantic, it carried with it more than just passengers. It bore the weight of dreams and aspirations, of social structures and economic realities. It was a symbol of an era defined by progress and disparity, a floating microcosm of the world it left behind and the new one it sailed toward. And while the Titanic's maiden voyage was shrouded in the romance of luxury and adventure, it's crucial to remember the realities beneath the surface, both the literal iceberg and the metaphorical ones of class and privilege. As the ship journeyed into the night, it did so as a beacon of human ambition, one that would soon find itself tested by the harsh realities of nature and human error alike. But for now, the passengers remained blissfully unaware, dining, dancing, and dreaming under the stars, on a ship that promised everything but guaranteed nothing. As the Titanic glided through the North Atlantic, her passengers blissfully unaware of what lay ahead, the night of April 14, 1912, began with a deceptive. The sea was as smooth as a freshly ironed shirt, and the sky was a canopy of stars, twinkling like nature's own LED display. A perfect night for sailing right. Well, not quite, because beneath this serene facade, trouble was brewing in the form of an iceberg, the kind you might call the ultimate party crasher. Let's punch in at 11:40 p.m. The Titanic was cruising at a brisk 22.5 knots, because who wouldn't want to test the limits of an unsinkable ship? When suddenly, Frederick Fleet, one of the ship's lookouts, spotted the iceberg looming ominously ahead. Fleet did what any of us would do when faced with an impending disaster. He rang the warning bell 3 times and phoned the bridge, delivering the understated message, "Iceberg right ahead." Now, here's where the myth-busting begins. Contrary to popular belief, Fleet wasn't up there with a spyglass, squinting into the distance like a pirate. In fact, the lookouts didn't even have binoculars. Yes, you heard that right. No binoculars on a ship trumpeted as the pinnacle of modern engineering. They were supposed to have them, but due to a mix-up that makes a sitcom plot look complex, the necessary equipment was locked away, out of reach. So, Fleet was forced to rely on good old-fashioned eyesight, a bit like asking someone to navigate New York City using a paper map in 2023. The iceberg warnings had been coming in all day, but they were largely ignored or downplayed. After all, the Titanic was unsinkable. Remember, these warnings were sent via the Marconi wireless system, which was the Edwardian equivalent of texting. But instead of paying heed to these icy alerts, the crew was more focused on sending passenger telegrams. Priorities. Folks, as Fleet's warning hit the bridge, First Officer William Murdoch sprang into action. He ordered the helm to be turned hard to starboard and the engines to be reversed, a maneuver straight out of the How to Avoid Icebergs for Dummies playbook. Unfortunately, the Titanic wasn't exactly a nimble ballerina of the seas, more like a lumbering giant with 2 left feet. The ship began to turn, but it was too little, too late. The iceberg scraped along the starboard side, a chilling kiss that spanned 300 feet and opened the hull like a can of sardines. Here's a fun fact. The iceberg itself was estimated to tower 100 feet above the water. That's about the height of a 10-story building, just floating around like it owns the place. And what about the iceberg's roots? Well, they say 90% of an iceberg is underwater, so you can imagine the massive chunk of ice lurking beneath the surface, just waiting to ruin someone's day. As water gushed into the Titanic at an alarming rate of 400 tons per minute, the ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, was summoned from his cabin. He quickly assessed the damage and delivered the grim prognosis. The Titanic was going down, and she was taking her unsinkable reputation with her. Now, let's talk about lifeboats, the unsung heroes of this tragic tale. The Titanic was equipped with just 20 lifeboats, enough for a mere 178 people. That's less than half of the 224 souls on board. Why so few? Because the prevailing wisdom was that lifeboats cluttered the decks and detracted from the ship's opulent aesthetics. Safety, it seemed, was not as fashionable as mahogany paneling and crystal chandeliers. In any case, who needs lifeboats when you have an unsinkable ship, right? Cue the chaos of lifeboat politics. At 12:05 a.m., Captain Edward Smith ordered the lifeboats to be uncovered and passengers to be assembled. But here's the kicker. The first lifeboats were launched with far fewer people than they could hold. Lifeboat No. 7, for instance, was designed for 65, but left with only 28 occupants. It's as if the passengers were convinced they'd be back on board in time for breakfast. The reluctance to fill lifeboats to capacity was partly due to confusion and disbelief. Many passengers refused to believe the ship was actually sinking, clinging to the myth of its invincibility. Others were hesitant to leave the perceived safety of the Titanic for what looked like flimsy little boats bobbing around in the dark. It was like choosing between a 5-star hotel and a tent during a hurricane. Most would stick with the hotel. As the clock ticked toward doom, the social hierarchy that had been so meticulously maintained began to crumble. First-class passengers were given preferential treatment, ushered to the lifeboats with a priority pass that no loyalty program could match. Meanwhile, many third-class passengers were left to fend for themselves, their path to safety blocked by locked gates and confusion. The Titanic may have been a symbol of luxury, but when it came to survival, it was every person for themselves. The crew, meanwhile, was trapped in a nightmare of their own. Many were inexperienced, with little training in emergency procedures. They were expected to manage the lifeboats, maintain order, and keep passengers calm, all while dealing with the reality that their own lives were hanging by a thread. And let's not forget the band, who famously played on, serenading the chaos with soothing tunes as if they were on a Sunday stroll. It was gallantry and denial at its finest. As the lifeboats drifted away, the Titanic continued to sink, her bow slipping beneath the icy waves. By 2:20 a.m., the ship that had been a floating palace was reduced to a ghostly silhouette, her stern rising high into the air before finally disappearing beneath the surface. It was a scene both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a somber reminder of nature's unforgiving power. In the end, only 706 people survived the disaster. The rest, over 500 souls, were lost to the sea, their hopes and dreams swallowed by the cold Atlantic. The Titanic's legacy, however, was just beginning. It would go on to become the maritime archetype of hubris and tragedy, a story retold countless times, each version trying to capture the essence of that fateful night. As we close this chapter, let's remember that the Titanic wasn't just a ship. It was a microcosm of early 20th century society, a floating testament to human ambition and its limits. It taught us about the perils of overconfidence, the importance of preparedness, and the stark realities of social inequality. But most of all, it reminded us that even the grandest of dreams can be shattered in an instant, leaving only lessons for those who dare to dream again. As the Titanic vanished beneath the icy Atlantic, leaving nothing but a trail of debris and unanswered questions, the cold, stark reality of survival set in. The remaining lifeboats bobbed amidst the wreckage, their occupants clinging to life in the frigid night air. Enter the RMS Carpathia, stage left. This ship, operated by the Cunard Line and helmed by Captain Arthur Rostron, was about to become a beacon of hope, or at least the closest thing to it for the Titanic's survivors. Let's talk timing. The Carpathia was a good 58 miles away when it picked up the Titanic's distress calls. That's roughly the distance of a marathon, except this was no Sunday jog. The SOS was a desperate plea, the kind you don't ignore. Captain Rostron, upon receiving the message, acted with the urgency of a fireman at a 4-alarm blaze. He ordered the ship to race full throttle, pushing his engines to a breakneck speed of 17 knots, a feat akin to coaxing a bit more horsepower from a family sedan in a drag race. Now, let's not romanticize this. The Carpathia wasn't some magical rescue vessel wading in the wings. It was an ordinary passenger liner, thrust into an extraordinary situation. The crew hastily prepared for what was about to unfold. Blankets were gathered, coffee was brewed by the gallon, and the ship's doctor organized makeshift medical stations. Rastron himself even ordered the heating turned off to ensure every ounce of power went to the engines. Talk about taking one for the team. By 4:00 a.m., the Carpathia was on the scene, navigating a sea littered with icebergs as if tiptoeing through a minefield. The sight that greeted them was haunting. Lifeboats scattered across the water, the survivors within shivering not just from the cold, but from the shock of it all. It was a scene as chaotic as a Black Friday sale, but with far higher stakes and no discounts on survival. The rescue operation was a masterclass in controlled chaos. The Carpathia's crew worked with the precision of synchronized swimmers, hauling survivors aboard, each one a testament to human resilience. Among them were first-class passengers like the unsinkable Marley Brown, whose quick thinking and refusal to accept a watery fate would later make her a legend. Brown reportedly took charge in her lifeboat, rallying others with all the authority of a drill sergeant at boot camp. Her spirit and sheer stubbornness became emblematic of the will to survive. But not everyone had their narrative of heroism. The rescue highlighted the grim divide between those who made it and those who didn't. Stories emerged of lifeboats with empty seats, of passengers and crew who had been denied a chance to board in the first place. These accounts stirred a pot of controversy that would simmer long after the immediate horror had passed. By 8:30 a.m., all the lifeboats were accounted for, and the Carpathia set course for New York, carrying 705 survivors and a cargo hold full of stories. The ship became a floating newsroom, with survivors recounting their experiences to a crew eager to document every detail. It was a tale of survival, yes, but also of loss and the stark disparities in who got to tell their story. Back on dry land, the news of the Titanic's sinking had ignited a media frenzy. Newspapers devoured the story with the appetite of a teenager at an all-you-can-eat buffet. There were tales of heroism and cowardice, of gallant gentlemen giving up their lifeboat seats and dastardly villains scrambling for safety. Headlines screamed of tragedy and triumph, each paper competing to outdo the next with sensational stories that blurred the line between fact and fiction. The press spun narratives as tangled as a bowl of spaghetti. J. Bruce Ismay, the White Star Line's bigwig who had managed to find a spot on a lifeboat, became a lightning rod for public outrage. He was painted as the cowardly villain, a man who had shirked his duty while women and children perished. Never mind that he'd reportedly tried to help others onto lifeboats before boarding himself. In the court of public opinion, he'd already been tried and convicted. Meanwhile, Captain Smith was lionized as a tragic hero, despite questions about his decisions that fateful night. The narrative needed a noble sacrifice, and Smith fit the bill. A seasoned captain going down with his ship, a poetic ending fit for the annals of maritime lore. Yet, amidst the swirling stories and finger-pointing, the cold reality remained. More than 500 lives had been lost, leaving a void that no amount of storytelling could fill. Families were shattered, futures erased, and a ship once synonymous with luxury was now an epitaph for human hubris. The Titanic disaster prompted a series of inquiries on both sides of the Atlantic, as governments and the public demanded answers. How, they asked, could such a catastrophe have occurred? The hearings were a spectacle unto themselves, with witnesses called to testify about everything from lifeboats to binoculars, or the lack thereof. It was a forensic dissection of a disaster, search for accountability that often seemed more like theater than justice. These inquiries led to significant changes in maritime law. Lifeboats for all passengers became mandatory, wireless communications were beefed up, and ice patrols were established to keep an eye on those floating party crashers. The Titanic's legacy, it turned out, would be more than just a cautionary tale. It was a catalyst for change, a reminder that progress should never outpace preparedness. As the Carpathia docked in New York on April 18th, it was met by throngs of reporters and curious onlookers. The survivors disembarked to a cacophony of questions, their faces bearing the marks of both relief and trauma. They were the lucky ones, the few who had lived to tell their tale, each story a thread in the tapestry of human endurance. And so, the Titanic's tale continued to captivate, a narrative woven from both the grandiose and the grim. It was a story of ambition and arrogance, of survival and sacrifice. The ship might have sunk, But its legend was buoyant, floating through history as a reminder of the delicate dance between man and nature. As Part 4 concludes, remember this: the Titanic was more than a maritime disaster. It was a mirror, reflecting the best and worst of humanity. The survivors' stories, the media's narratives, and the subsequent changes all form a complex mosaic, one that challenges us to look beyond the myths and confront the truths that lie beneath. And while the ship itself is gone, resting on the ocean floor, its lessons continue to resonate, urging us to never underestimate the unpredictable tides of life. And so, as the Titanic rests in her oceanic grave, her story continues to ripple through time, echoing far beyond the cold depths of the Atlantic. The disaster was a wake-up call, the maritime equivalent of a cold shower, jarring, necessary, and impossible to ignore. Let's kick things off by diving into the aftermath, a regulatory shake-up that would make any bureaucrat's head spin. One of the most significant outcomes of the Titanic's demise was the establishment of the International Ice Patrol in 1914. Picture it as the vigilant neighborhood watch of the North Atlantic, but with ships and planes instead of binocular-toting retirees. This patrol was tasked with monitoring and reporting iceberg activity to prevent future nautical nightmares. In essence, it's like having a weather app for icebergs, crucial when you're cruising through Iceberg Alley, trying to avoid a reenactment of 1912. The British and American inquiries into the sinking spurred a host of maritime safety reforms, turning the Titanic tragedy into a blueprint for what not to do on the high seas. Lifeboats for all passengers. Check. Regular lifeboat drills. You bet. The mandatory presence of 24-hour radio operators on ships. Absolutely. It was as if maritime law got a much-needed upgrade, like moving from dial-up to fiber optic in the world of transatlantic travel. But the Titanic's legacy wasn't confined to legislative tomes and safety protocols. Oh no, this ship was destined for cultural immortality. It became a muse for storytellers, inspiring a cavalcade of films, books, and documentaries, each one adding a new layer to the legend. From the 1958 classic, A Night to Remember, to James Cameron's 1997 blockbuster, the Titanic's tale has been spun and respun, each time with a fresh coat of dramatic flair. The public's fascination with the Titanic isn't just about the disaster. It's about the stories of the people aboard, the human drama played out against the backdrop of catastrophe. It's the doomed romance, the gallant sacrifices, the unsinkable claims that were, well, sunk. The Titanic is a narrative goldmine, offering endless angles from which to explore the interplay of fate, fortune, and folly. And let's not ignore the role of myth-making in keeping the Titanic afloat in our collective consciousness. The idea of the unsinkable ship was a marketing coup, a promise of invincibility that was shattered as dramatically as a champagne bottle against a hull. The ship's tragic end turned it into a cautionary tale, a reminder that nature doesn't care about human hubris or headlines. It's a story as old as time. Build a tower, fly too close to the sun, or in this case, sail too confidently through icy waters. But here's where we need to pump the brakes on romance. The real story of the Titanic is less about the grand gestures and more about the gritty realities. The stark inequalities among passengers, the flawed safety measures, the miscommunications. These are the truths that often get lost in the cinematic retelling. The Titanic wasn't just a stage for heroism. It was also a stark reminder of the societal gaps that left many passengers with no way out. Take the lifeboats, for instance. The fact that many left half full while third-class passengers scrambled for survival isn't just a footnote. It's a glaring indictment of the era's class divide. The Titanic was a microcosm of Edwardian society, where your ticket class could determine your fate. It's a sobering reminder that beneath the glitzy veneer of history lies a story of human error and systemic failure. And yet, the allure of the Titanic endures, a siren call to historians and thrill-seekers alike. The ship's remains, discovered in 1985, continue to captivate explorers and researchers, each dive revealing new details and raising new questions. Artifacts retrieved from the wreck offer tangible connections to the past, pieces of a puzzle that will never be fully solved, but will always intrigue. So why does the Titanic continue to grip our imagination? Perhaps it's because it encapsulates the dual nature of human endeavor, the quest for greatness, and the potential for disaster. It's a tale of dreams both realized and dashed, a testament to both human ingenuity and vulnerability. The Titanic is a mirror reflecting our aspirations and our frailties, a reminder that in our pursuit of progress, we must never lose sight of humility. As we wrap up this journey through Titanic's legacy, let's not forget the hard-won lessons it imparted. The ship's story is a cautionary tale, a narrative that urges us to balance ambition with caution, to respect the forces of nature, and to ensure that progress does not come at the expense of preparedness. The Titanic's legend is one of tragedy, yes, but also of transformation, a testament to the enduring human spirit and our quest to learn from past missteps. So, as you drift off to sleep, let the Titanic saga sail through your dreams, a story of ambition and arrogance, of innovation and oversight. It's a legend that reminds us of the beauty and peril of human endeavor, forever anchored in the annals of history. Sweet dreams, and may your voyages always be iceberg-free. The Nabataeans were the rock stars of the ancient world, literally. Picture this. They carved their homes straight into the desert cliffs of what's now Jordan, Syria, and Saudi Arabia. Talk about taking living under a rock to a whole new level. These desert architects were strutting their stuff from the 4th century BCE to the 1st century CE, a time when most folks were still figuring out which end of the stick was up. So, who were these enigmatic builders, and why did they opt for a life of stone and sand? Let's start with the basics. The Nabataeans were a group of Arab tribes who figured out that the harsh, arid landscapes of the Middle East had more to offer than just a spectacular view of nothing. They were smack dab in the middle of global trade routes, connecting the riches of the East with the cravings of the West. Forget your modern-day influencers. These guys were the original middlemen of luxury goods. Spices, silk, incense. If it was exotic and expensive, chances are a Nabataean had his hand in it. But why the rocks? Well, when you're living in a region where the sun has a personal vendetta against everything that breathes, you get creative. The Nabataeans transformed the unforgiving stone into cool, shaded living spaces that would make any modern-day architect weep with envy. Petra, their crown jewel, is a testament to their ingenuity. Picture a city carved into rose-red cliffs, where buildings and temples emerge from the rock face in a feat of engineering that laughs in the face of gravity and logic. This wasn't just stone carving, it was stone poetry. Now, let's talk climate control. While their neighbors were busy figuring out how not to melt in the sun, the Nabataeans were channeling water like ancient hydrologists. They built an intricate system of dams, cisterns, and aqueducts, turning the desert into an oasis of sustainability. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving, with enough water to spare for agriculture, a luxury in those parts. Take that, Mother Nature. In the grand game of ancient geopolitics, the Nabataeans were the Switzerland of their time, neutral yet indispensable. They managed to dodge the territorial ambitions of larger empires like the Romans by playing it smart. Their wealth from trade and knack for diplomacy kept them under the radar and over the bank. They were the Houdinis of the ancient world, slipping through the fingers of empires with a grin and a handful of incense. But let's not get too romantic. The Nabataeans weren't just peaceful traders sipping date wine in the shade. They had a few tricks up their sleeves for dealing with rivals. Their cities were fortified, their trade routes were guarded, and their military was nothing to scoff at. They understood that, in a world where might often made right, a little muscle could go a long way. And speaking of myths, let's bust a big one. The Nabataeans weren't some lost civilization forgotten by time. They were very much in the thick of it, influencing cultures and economies far beyond their desert home. Their legacy lived on, even as their kingdom was absorbed into the Roman Empire in the early 2nd century CE. The Romans, ever the fans of good architecture and better trade routes, recognized the value of what the Nabataeans had built and incorporated it into their own empire. In the end, the Nabataeans weren't just masters of stone and trade. They were masters of adaptation. They took a harsh environment and turned it into a thriving hub of culture and commerce. They were the original adapt or die entrepreneurs, leaving behind a legacy carved in stone. And while we might romanticize their story with tales of hidden treasure and ancient wisdom, the reality is just as intriguing. A people who saw the desert not as a barrier, but as an opportunity. Now that's what I call seeing the glass half full. So, about that glass-half-full mentality. Enter Petra, the crown jewel, the grand prize, the architectural mic drop of the Nabataean Empire. Forget Lost City. Petra was the ancient equivalent of Times Square during rush hour, minus the neon lights and Broadway ads. It was less about being forgotten by time, and more about being the hardest desert destination for traders and merchants from every corner of the ancient world. If you were schlepping silk or spices across continents, Petra was the place to see and be seen. Now, let's talk about Al-Khazne, or as you might know it, the treasury. But spoiler alert, no actual treasure here, folks. Sorry to burst that Indiana Jones bubble. This iconic structure isn't just a pretty facade. It's a masterclass in ancient architecture and a testament to the Nabataeans' stone-carving prowess. Standing at about 39 meters high, that's over 120 feet for those keeping score at home, and 25 meters wide, this grand edifice was more a tomb than a vault of gold. The Nabataeans, it seems, had a flair for giving their dearly departed a send-off fit for royalty, the little rock and roll flair to boot. So how did these desert dwellers pull off such architectural feats? With a little help from their geographical real estate and a lot of ingenuity. Petra wasn't just a city, it was an oasis, strategically nestled in a valley surrounded by towering cliffs. Talk about a natural fortress. The Nabataeans turned these cliffs into canvases, carving their city out of the rose-red rock in a way that would make Michelangelo weep. And while it might look like these structures were designed to impress the guards, they were also about impressing the neighbors, and more importantly, the lucrative trade partners. But Petra wasn't just about aesthetics. Picture this. In a land where water is as scarce as a Wi-Fi signal in the wilderness, these ancient hydrologists were running a water management system that would make modern engineers nod in respect. They built over 200 cisterns, channeling water from flash floods into reservoirs that stored it for dry spells. Not bad for a civilization that didn't have the luxury of a YouTube tutorial. This wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving in style. And here's where the myth-busting fun begins. Many of us like to romanticize Petra as a hidden Shangri-La tucked away from the prying eyes of history. But reality check. It was more of an ancient shopping mall, bustling with traders hawking everything from Arabian frankincense to Indian spices. Petra wasn't lost to time. It was a hub of commerce and culture, a melting pot of influences that kept the Nabataeans' coffers full and their bellies fed. Speaking of myths, let's address the elephant in the room. Petra and its so-called treasury weren't exactly a Nabataean Fort Knox. The nickname stems from a local legend that pirates or pharaohs stashed their loot there, leading to a lot of wishful thinking and a few misguided attempts to crack open the stone facade. But the reality, it's a tomb, folks. A darn impressive one, but a tomb nonetheless. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate the broader picture here. Petra wasn't just a city, it was a statement. The Nabataeans were telling the world, we've got this. They weren't just surviving in the desert, they were dominating it. And while the Romans eventually rolled in and absorbed the Nabataean kingdom into their empire, they didn't do it by force. Why? Because the Nabataeans had something the Romans wanted, a thriving trade network and a city that was already the stuff of legends. But before we hand the Romans too much credit, let's not forget that the Nabataeans were the original deal-makers. They knew how to play the political game, keeping their independence, while the rest of the ancient world played empire musical chairs. Even as they became a part of the Roman Empire in the early 2nd century CE, their legacy lived on, their influence echoing through the ages like a desert wind. In the grand tapestry of history, Petra is a testament to the Nabataeans' vision and adaptability. They took a barren landscape and turned it into a vibrant hub of culture and commerce. And while the myths may paint Petra as a lost city, the reality is far more intriguing. It was a testament to human ingenuity, a monument to a people who saw opportunity where others saw only sand. So, next time you think of Petra, ditch the Hollywood romanticism and remember the real story. A story of survival, savvy, and a rock-solid legacy that continues to captivate us today. Speaking of rock-solid legacies, let's dive into the Nabataeans' ability to blend in and thrive under Roman rule, a feat that could make any chameleon blush. Picture the ancient world as a giant board game where empires like Rome were the heavyweight champions, gobbling up territories like they were collecting Pokémon cards. Amidst this chaos, the Nabataeans managed to keep their autonomy and even flourish. How did they pull this off? By mastering the art of camouflage, politically and economically. First up, the political chess match. The Nabataeans weren't just sitting idly by while Rome played empire monopoly. They were astute observers, recognizing that in the grand theater of geopolitics, sometimes it's better to be the stager hand than the star. As the Romans expanded, the Nabataeans played the role of the suave diplomat, ensuring their kingdom remained a valuable ally rather than a conquered foe. This wasn't just about schmoozing with Roman senators and governors. It was about understanding the balance of power and playing both sides where necessary. Let's not forget, the Nabataeans were the original middlemen of the ancient world, and they wielded this position like a finely tuned instrument. As the Romans and Persians eyed each other across the desert, the Nabataeans were the quiet conductors, ensuring the trade symphony played on. They were smack dab in the middle of the incense route, a lucrative corridor that connected the Arabian Peninsula with the Mediterranean. This wasn't your run-of-the-mill spice rack we're talking about. Frankincense and myrrh were worth their weight in gold, literally. We're talking about a spice trade that could rival the GDP of small countries today. Now, let's debunk the myth of the Nabataeans' peaceful absorption into the Roman Empire. Many romanticize this as a gentle transition, like slipping into a warm bath. But the reality, it was more like a savvy business merger. The Romans didn't conquer the Nabataeans through brute force. They wooed them with the promise of prosperity and mutual benefit. It was a strategic alliance, not a hostile takeover. The Nabataeans knew that joining the Roman Empire could open new markets for their goods while maintaining a degree of autonomy. They had the foresight to see that survival sometimes means embracing change, not resisting it. Economically, Nabataeans were no pushovers. They maintained their trade networks, even as Roman coins started jingling in their coffers. Petra remained a bustling hub of commerce, and the Nabataeans continued to export not just goods, but culture and ideas. Their architecture influenced Roman designs, as did their expertise in water management. The Romans, ever the pragmatists, knew a good thing when they saw it, and incorporated Nabataean innovations into their own infrastructure. But here's the kicker. While the Nabataeans were adept at blending in, they also maintained their unique identity. They didn't just become Romans in Arab clothing. They retained their language, their customs, and their traditions. This wasn't about losing themselves in the Roman melting pot. It was about adding their distinct flavor to the mix. The Nabataeans were like the cool kids at the ancient lunch table, influencing everyone around them while never losing sight of their roots. In this delicate dance with Rome, the Nabataeans demonstrated a level of strategic acumen that would make Machiavelli nod in approval. They knew when to hold M and when to fold M, as the saying goes. Their ability to navigate the complex political landscape of the time ensured their survival long after many other kingdoms had faded into obscurity. So, what's the takeaway here? The Nabataeans weren't just passive players in the grand narrative of history. They were savvy operators, carving out a space for themselves in a world dominated by giants. They understood that sometimes the best way to preserve your culture is to adapt and evolve. In a world where empires rose and fell like the tides, the Nabataeans proved that flexibility and cunning could be just as powerful as any army. And while the myths of their peaceful absorption into the Roman Empire persist, the reality is far more compelling. A tale of strategic minds who saw the future and adapted to ensure their legacy endured. As the dust settled on the Nabataean Empire, what happened next reads like the script of an ancient drama filled with unexpected plot twists, economic mishaps, and natural disasters that could have been penned by Lemony Snicket himself. The decline of the Nabataeans wasn't a singular catastrophic event, but rather a prolonged series of unfortunate events that even a seasoned historian would envy for its complexity. First up on the list of calamities is the trade route shuffle. You see, the Nabataeans had long thrived as the middlemen of the incense route, raking in profits like ancient Wall Street brokers. But around the 3rd century CE, trade winds and routes began to shift. New maritime routes developed by the Romans and Byzantines cut through the Red Sea, bypassing the overland paths that made Petra and its sister cities boomtowns. Imagine your favorite coffee shop suddenly out of the way because a new highway just opened up. Ouch. While the Nabataeans had long played their trade cards like pros, The reality of shifting routes was an economic gut punch. They tried to adapt, but it's tough to compete when Mother Nature, geography, and Roman engineers are all rooting for the competition. As the incense caravans dwindled, so did the wealth that had once flowed like the waters in their expertly crafted aqueducts. Then there's the matter of earthquakes. Yes, earthquakes. Just when you think things couldn't get worse, the earth literally moves to prove you wrong. In 363 C, a massive quake shook the region, splitting Petra's stunning rock facades like a cracked smartphone screen. The damage was catastrophic, not just to the iconic architecture, but to the infrastructure that supported the cities. This wasn't just an architectural oopsie. It was a full-blown catastrophe that crippled the Nabataeans' ability to maintain their once flourishing urban centers. Now, if you're thinking the Nabataeans had it rough, you're right. But wait, there's more. Environmental changes were also brewing trouble. Climatic shifts led to reduced rainfall, turning the already arid region into an even harsher environment. The Nabataeans, masters of water management, suddenly found their reservoirs running dry. Their intricate system of cisterns and canals, once the envy of the ancient world, became relics of a bygone era of abundance. And if you're keeping score, here's another strike against the Nabataeans: Rome's changing priorities. As the empire expanded, its focus shifted to more pressing concerns, leaving the Nabataean territories somewhat neglected. Roman administrative changes meant less investment in the upkeep of this once vital region. The Nabataeans, once the toast of the ancient trading world, were now like a forgotten high school prom queen, still impressive, but no longer the center of attention. But let's not romanticize this decline as a tragic fall from grace. The Nabataeans were human, after all, prone to the same miscalculations and overreach as any civilization. Their decline wasn't just about bad luck. It was about being caught in a perfect storm of economic shifts, natural disasters, and changing political landscapes. And yet, through all this, their legacy in architecture and engineering shines brighter than a desert sun. Their rock-cut cities, particularly Petra, remain a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. Even as the Nabataean civilization faded into the annals of history, their architectural marvels continue to captivate explorers, archaeologists, and tourists alike. It's as if these stone monuments serve as a permanent reminder that once upon a time, in the harsh expanse of the Arabian desert, a people dared to dream and carve that which defied the limits of their world. In the end, the Nabataean story is one of both triumph and tragedy, a narrative etched in stone that speaks to the enduring spirit of innovation and adaptability. While they may have been dealt a losing hand by the relentless forces of history, the Nabataeans left behind a legacy that transcends their decline. Their ability to transform rock into poetry, to turn barren landscapes into bustling hubs, serves as an eternal testament to human potential. And as we continue to explore their remnants, we're reminded that even in decline, there's a story worth telling, a tale of ingenuity, resilience, and a bit of humor in the face of fate's cruel twists. But let's not get too caught up in tragedy, because the Nabataeans left us with a legacy that sticks around like a catchy pop song you can't get out of your head. Their impact on history and architecture is like that younger sibling who quietly outshines the older one, subtle but unforgettable. So, why do these ancient rock carvers still capture our imaginations today? Well, let's dive into this architectural soap opera and find out. First, a quick recap. The Nabataeans were the original underdog story. Imagine a group of nomadic tribes who took one look at the barren cliffs of Petra and thought, challenge accepted. They weren't just about turning rock into homes. They were about turning inhospitable landscapes into thriving trade hubs, and they did it with a flair that would make even the most seasoned Pinterest DIYer weep with envy. Their architecture wasn't just functional. It was a bold statement that said, we might be in the middle of nowhere, but we're making this nowhere somewhere. So what exactly makes Nabataean architecture so special? For one, their ability to blend form and function was unparalleled. They didn't just carve facades. They created a seamless integration between human habitation and natural environment. The treasury at Petra, for example, isn't just a pretty face. It's a complex structure that served both ceremonial and practical purposes. And let's not forget their ingenious water management systems, which turned the desert into a veritable oasis. We're talking about over 200 cisterns and countless aqueducts that could teach modern engineers a thing or two. You can't help but admire a civilization that looked at a barren landscape and saw potential rather than a wasteland. Now, onto the myths that have sprouted like weeds around the Nabataeans. First up, the legend of hidden treasure. Thanks to a mix of Hollywood movies and local lore, many believe Petra's treasury to be a secret vault of gold, guarded by ancient curses and riddles. Spoiler alert, it's not. The treasure is the architecture itself, an enduring testament to human creativity and resilience. The real gold here is the cultural and architectural influence the Nabataeans had on later societies, from the Romans who adopted their water systems to the Byzantines who marveled at their urban planning. Speaking of influence, let's not overlook how the Nabataeans paved the way for future architectural innovations. Their rock-cut designs and water management techniques were like the ancient world's TED talks, spreading ideas far and wide. The Romans, ever the opportunists, borrowed heavily from Nabataean designs, incorporating their techniques into Roman aqueducts and city planning. You could say the Nabataeans were the silent partners in the Roman Empire's architectural prowess. And what about those secret societies? Another myth that gives the Nabataeans a Da Vinci Code-level allure. While it's tempting to imagine clandestine meetings in hidden chambers, the reality is far more mundane. The Nabataeans were skilled merchants and diplomats, not shadowy cabals plotting world domination. Their secret lay in their ability to adapt and thrive, using their strategic location and diplomatic savvy to outmaneuver larger empires. They were more about trade deals than secret handshakes, more about practical alliances than coded messages. In the grand scheme of things, the Nabataeans remind us that sometimes the most extraordinary feats come from the most ordinary circumstances. They didn't have the resources of Rome or the mystique of Egypt, but they had something arguably more valuable: vision and adaptability. They took what the world threw at them, be it desert sands, economic shifts, or political changes, and turned it to their advantage. In a way, their story is a lesson in resilience, a reminder that innovation often comes from necessity. So, where does that leave us today? Well, the Nabataeans' legacy continues to resonate, not just in the stones of Petra, but in the very way we think about architecture and urban planning. Their ability to harmonize human needs with natural environments is a lesson that's increasingly relevant in our modern world. As we grapple with issues of sustainability and resource management, they're a reminder that sometimes the best solutions are already written in the stones of history. As we wrap up this narrative, let's take a moment to appreciate the real treasure of the Nabataeans, their enduring influence. They were the original architects of innovation, the masters of making the improbable possible. And while the myths and legends add a dash of romance to their story, the reality is far more inspiring. They were a civilization that saw opportunity where others saw obstacles, a people who turned the harshness of the desert into a canvas for their dreams. In the end, the Nabataeans left us more than just ruins. They left us a legacy of ingenuity and resilience, a story etched in stone that continues to captivate and inspire. So next time you find yourself pondering the mysteries of the past, remember the Nabataeans. They might not have left behind hidden gold or secret societies, but they gave us something far more valuable, a testament to the power of human creativity and the enduring spirit of innovation. And isn't that the kind of legacy worth remembering? Your morning in ancient Babylon begins with a cacophony of sounds that could give your modern city alarm clock a run for its money. Forget the gentle beeping. Here, it's the guttural bark of a vendor unrolling his woven mats, the clatter of clay pots, and the low hum of voices already haggling over yesterday's stale bread. Welcome to the Ishtar Gate, a marvel of blue-glazed bricks that screams opulence, while the reality is more of a whisper of poverty. This gateway isn't just an entrance, it's a full-blown economic engine. Picture a grand archway stretching nearly 50 feet high, embellished with lions, dragons, and bulls, each symbolizing the gods Marduk, Adad, and Ishtar. Those beasts aren't just decorative. They're the ancient world's version of neon signs, proclaiming Babylon's divine approval and commercial dominance. But here's the kicker. Every glorious detail comes at a price. The upkeep of this majestic entrance demands resources that could feed families for months. It's one thing to build a symbol of power. It's another to maintain it when your city of 200,000 is teetering on the edge of sustenance. Now, let's talk about your breakfast. Forget your morning latte. You've got a bread and beer situation here. That might sound like the breakfast of champions, but it's actually the breakfast of necessity. Grain is king in Babylon, where the average worker's daily wage could barely buy enough barley to make this staple loaf. And beer, well, that's not just for weekend indulgence. It's a safer bet than water, which, let's be honest, could double as a microbial petri dish. The reality is stark. You're living in a city where the difference between a full belly and hunger isn't a gourmet decision but a matter of survival. But wait, there's more. As you navigate the market, the aromas of exotic spices, cinnamon, myrrh, and frankincense tickle your nose. They promise wealth and luxury, yet these goods are more likely to line the tables of the elite than your own. Merchants, the rock stars of the ancient economy, hold the keys to these treasures, often doubling as diplomats and spies, all while juggling ledgers that would make modern accountants weep. Trade routes spider-webbing from Babylon reach out to distant Egypt and the Mediterranean, pulling in goods that most citizens can only dream of. You might be thinking, surely there's some tax relief. Well, think again. The Babylonian tax system is as complex as a modern tax code, but with fewer loopholes. King Nebuchadnezzar Roman II, yes, he of the Hanging Gardens fame, if they even existed, ensures that his coffers are filled with silver shekels, not IOUs. Taxes are levied on everything from land to livestock, and let's just say, the IRS has nothing on Babylon's scribes. These guys are the original number crunchers, sitting in their clay tablet-filled offices, ensuring every last shekel is accounted for. And speaking of those tablets, Babylon's scribes are the unsung heroes of the city's survival. They document everything from trade transactions to legal contracts, acting as the glue holding this bustling metropolis together. Their cuneiform script isn't just an alphabet, it's a lifeline, ensuring that the wheels of commerce and bureaucracy keep turning. Try writing out your shopping list and those wedge-shaped impressions and see how far you get. As the sun climbs higher over the Euphrates, the stark contrast of wealth and poverty becomes glaringly apparent. The well-to-do strut through the city in garments dyed with precious indigo and crimson, flaunting their status like ancient influencers. Meanwhile, the less fortunate are left to scavenge the market's dusty corners, their hopes of upward mobility as fleeting as a cool breeze in the scorching Babylonian sun. By now, you might be wondering, how did anyone survive here? Well, survival in Babylon is a masterclass in resilience. The city's inhabitants are experts at navigating its economic labyrinth, balancing the scales of hardship and hope with as much dexterity as the acrobats who occasionally entertain in the city squares. They might not have your modern conveniences, but they've got grit and ingenuity by the amphora full. So, as you contemplate your place in this ancient world, grappling with the sobering realities of Babylonian life, remember, this isn't just a day in history. It's a testament to the enduring spirit of a civilization that, despite its grandeur and its grinding poverty, left an indelible mark on the tapestry of human history. And while you might long for your modern comforts, there's something to be said for experiencing life on the edge of antiquity, where every moment is a balancing act between the mythic and the mundane. So here you are, standing in the thick of Babylon, where social classes are as rigid as the bricks in the Ishtar Gate. The city might be a melting pot of trade and culture, but don't mistake that for social mobility. It's more like a stew where the ingredients never really blend, just bump into each other, occasionally spilling over. At the top of this societal stew is the king. Think of him as the ultimate influencer, with a crown instead of a TikTok account. Hammurabi, the name you've probably heard tossed around like a historical hot potato, is famous for his code. Picture this. Over 280 laws etched into a giant stone stela, standing like an ancient iPad of justice. These aren't just any rules. They're the eye for an eye kind of justice, and they make modern legal systems look like a spa day. The Code of Hammurabi is more than just a legal handbook. It's a mirror reflecting the Babylonian obsession with order. The laws cover everything from property rights to, yes, the price of beer. And while you might chuckle at the thought of your neighbor getting fined for overcharging on a pint, in Babylon, that's serious business. Descending the social ladder, you're greeted by the free citizens. These folks aren't exactly living the high life, but they've got a leg up on the commoners and slaves. They can own property and engage in commerce, but don't mistake that for freedom. The weight of taxes and the whims of the ruling class ensure that their lives are more treadmill than triumph. Then there are the commoners, more numerous and less privileged. They're the backbone of Babylon's labor force. Think of them as the original gig workers, minus the apps and surge pricing. They're the farmers, artisans, and laborers who keep the city's heart beating, yet their lives are governed by the whims of those above them. And while they might dream of climbing the social ladder, the rungs are often greased with the sweat of their own efforts, keeping them firmly in place. At the bottom of this hierarchy are the slaves. Their stories are etched less in stone and more in the margins of history. Slavery in Babylon isn't just a social status, it's a life sentence. Captured in war or sold into bondage, slaves are at the mercy of their owners, and their rights are, shall we say, limited. While the Code of Hammurabi does offer some protections, like not beating a slave to death without consequence, it's hardly the stuff of social justice. Now, as you're blending into this crowd, dodging the occasional donkey cart, and trying not to get lost in the throng of humanity, you might notice something. The laws that govern these people are as omnipresent as the dust in the air. They dictate everything from daily transactions to personal relationships, and while they might sound draconian, they offer a semblance of order in an otherwise chaotic world. But here's a fun twist. These laws aren't just about punishment. They're a bit of ancient PR, showcasing the king's commitment to justice and order. It's a clever play, ensuring the king is seen as both a fearsome ruler and a benevolent father figure, a duality as ancient as the city itself. As you wander these streets, you can almost hear the echo of scribes chiseling away at clay tablets, documenting disputes over livestock or the occasional land grab. It's a bureaucratic ballet performed on a stage of weathered stone and sun-baked mud. These scribes are the unsung heroes, their cuneiform script a lifeline that threads through the layers of Babylonian society. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality is that these laws, while often harsh, provide a framework that keeps Babylon from descending into chaos. It's a precarious balance, like juggling flaming torches on a windy day, and one misstep could send the whole act tumbling. In this world of rigid hierarchies and unyielding laws, you might find yourself longing for the relative anarchy of a modern traffic jam. But remember, these codes and classes are the glue holding Babylon together, the threads that weave its social fabric. And while they might not offer the freedom or fairness of our times, they are a testament to humanity's eternal quest for order amidst the chaos. So, as you weave through the labyrinthine streets and feel the weight of this ancient legacy on your shoulders, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of this society. The weight of Hammurabi's code and the rigidity of social classes are as much a part of Babylon as its grand architecture and bustling markets. And while you might be glad to return to the comforts of your own era, there's a certain allure in experiencing life at the crossroads of history, where every step is a dance between the past and the present. And just like that, as the midday sun bakes the Babylonian streets to a crisp, you find yourself swept up in the vibrant chaos of this ancient world, where ambition and artistry collide in a spectacular, if somewhat grimy, display of culture. Let's dive right in, shall we? Time to talk about the real rock stars of Babylon, not the lyre-plucking bards or those acrobats tumbling through the square, but the scribes, the original brainiacs of the ancient world. These guys wielded cuneiform like a maestro conducts an orchestra, their styluses striking clay tablets in a symphony of bureaucracy and literature. Now, cuneiform isn't your garden variety alphabet. No, it's a complex system of over 600 symbols that makes today's emoji combos look like child's play. Learning it was no small feat. It was a full-time occupation, a ticket to the upper echelons of society, if you could hack it. Imagine spending years hunched over a slab of clay, painstakingly etching out wedges and lines while the world buzzed by in a blur of trade and turmoil. For those who dared to embark on this educational odyssey, the payoff was sweet: prestige, power, and the occasional nod from the king himself. Scribes were the gatekeepers of knowledge, the keepers of contracts, and the arbiters of disputes. They could make or break fortunes with a flick of a stylus, and in a world where knowledge was power, they were the undisputed aristocracy of intellect. But hold your horses, because while the scribes might have been the intellectual elite, the road to mastering cuneiform was paved with more than just ambition. It's estimated that only about 1% of the population had the opportunity and the means to become literate. Most Babylonian kids were more likely to learn how to plow a field than craft a sentence. Education was a privilege, a luxury item as rare as a unicorn in a desert storm. Moving on from the scribes, let's talk art and architecture. Two things Babylon did as extravagantly as a Las Vegas hotel strip. The city was a canvas of grandiose proportions, its buildings a testament to both human ingenuity and, let's be honest, the back-breaking labor of those who toiled in the shadows. Take the ziggurats, for instance. These massive tiered temples reached for the sky like ancient skyscrapers, serving as both places of worship and symbols of divine connection. The most famous, the Eremenenki, was said to have 7 tiers, each representing a celestial body. But it wasn't just the gods who benefited from these architectural wonders. The sheer scale of these constructions sent a clear message. Babylon was a force to be reckoned with. And let's not forget the piece de resistance, the Hanging Gardens. Ah, the gardens, the stuff of legend, and perhaps a bit of mythological embellishment. You see, despite their fame, there's a distinct lack of evidence that they actually existed in Babylon. Ancient historians like Herodotus and Strabo waxed lyrical about lush terraces and cascading waterfalls, but modern archaeology offers little in the way of proof. It's a classic case of ancient PR, a tale spun to dazzle and divert, perhaps concocted to rival the wonders of rival cities like Nineveh. If they did exist, the gardens would have been an engineering marvel. Picture this, a verdant oasis in the heart of a desert city, supported by an elaborate system of pumps and aqueducts to draw water from the Euphrates. An ancient version of hydraulic engineering that would make modern architects nod in respect. The sheer manpower required to maintain such a paradise would have been staggering, with slaves and laborers working tirelessly to keep the greenery lush and the fountains flowing. But alas, like many things in history, the truth remains elusive, a tantalizing mystery cloaked in the dust of centuries. Speaking of labor, let's not sugarcoat it. Babylonian construction was less about visionary leadership and more about sheer human effort. Slaves formed the backbone of this Herculean task force, their lives consumed by the relentless demands of building a city to awe the gods. Stone by stone, brick by brick, they toiled under the unforgiving sun, their contributions largely unrecorded, their sacrifices hidden in the foundations of Babylon's grandeur. Yet, amidst the sweat and toil, Babylon's cultural tapestry flourished. Artisans crafted intricate mosaics and vibrant frescoes, their hands guided by tradition and innovation alike. The city was a melting pot of artistic styles, a crossroads where influences from Egypt, Persia, and beyond converged to create something uniquely Babylonian. These visual masterpieces adorned the walls of palaces and temples, their colors a testament to the city's wealth and taste. As you stand amidst this cacophony of creativity, it's easy to be swept away by the allure of it all. But beneath the surface, the stark reality remains. Babylon's beauty was built on the backs of those who labored in obscurity, their lives bound to the whims of kings and the caprices of history. It's a sobering thought, a reminder that behind every legend lies the untold stories of those who made it possible. So here you are, an observer in a world that seems both alien and strangely familiar. The scribes, the artisans, the laborers, all part of a complex web of society, each playing their role in the grand drama of Babylonian life. As the sun begins its descent, casting long shadows over the city, take a moment to ponder the legacy of this ancient civilization. It's a story of ambition and artistry, of power and poverty, woven together in a tapestry as intricate as the cuneiform tablets that recorded its history. And as you prepare to step back into your own time, remember this. Babylon may be a relic of the past, but its echoes continue to resonate through the corridors of history. Its lessons, both glorious and grim, offer a window into the human condition, a reflection of our eternal quest for meaning and mastery in a world that is ever-changing, yet fundamentally the same. As you soak in the fading Babylonian sunlight, you suddenly find yourself at the heart of the ancient power game, where the stakes are as high as the towering ziggurats. Welcome to the world of Nebuchadnezzar Roman II, the mastermind behind Babylon's most glorious era. the guy who took the city from impressive to legendary. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just dream of empires. He built them brick by brick, campaign by campaign, leaving a legacy as enduring as the very bricks his scribes recorded his deeds on. Now, Nebuchadnezzar wasn't just another king with a fancy title. He was the ancient world's version of a strategic chess champion, always 5 moves ahead. Born in 634 BCE, he ruled for a whopping 43 years, from 605 to 562 BCE, a reign that would make even the most seasoned CEOs break into a sweat. He wasn't just sitting on a throne, twiddling his thumbs and admiring his crown either. No, he was out there expanding Babylon's borders like it was the hardest real estate market around. His crowning achievement, the conquest of Jerusalem in 587 BCE, talk about a headline grabber. Nebuchadnezzar didn't just stroll in and hang a sold sign. He leveled the city, destroyed the temple, and carted off the Israelites to Babylon, a move that echoed through history like a particularly loud gong. Sure, it might sound like an ancient episode of Extreme Makeover, City Edition, but this was no home improvement show. It was power politics with a side of cultural upheaval. And speaking of politics, Nebuchadnezzar was a maestro of diplomacy, albeit with a twist. He didn't just send emissaries with olive branches. He sent armies to drive home the point. His rule wasn't just about territory. It was about control, power, and making sure everyone knew exactly who was boss. Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar was like a well-oiled machine, albeit one that occasionally ran on the tears and toil of the conquered. But let's not get too carried away with the grandeur. Behind the polished image of Babylon as the center of the universe, there was a lot of gritty reality. Nebuchadnezzar's empire was held together by a mixture of fear, force, and the occasional diplomatic flatteries. It was less of a cohesive empire and more of a patchwork quilt, with each piece stitched together by treaties and tributes. His vassal states were like those reluctant party guests who only showed up because they were afraid of what might happen if they didn't. Diplomacy in Babylon was a delicate dance, performed on a tightrope stretched between ambition and necessity. The city was a hub of international intrigue, with spies and envoys flitting about like moths to a flame. Trade agreements were sealed with handshakes and the threat of a sword behind the back, an ancient version of trust, but verified. You see, Babylon didn't just rely on military might. It leveraged its status as a trade juggernaut to wield influence far beyond its city walls. Now, let's pivot to Nebuchadnezzar's military machine, because what's an empire without a formidable army, right? His forces were the ancient equivalent of a blockbuster action movie, big, bold, and impossible to ignore. Think chariots, infantry, archers, the works. Babylonian soldiers were well equipped, their armor gleaming in the sun, their weapons ready to carve out a new chapter in the annals of history. But here's the kicker. Despite the glittering image of unstoppable might, ancient warfare was more about attrition than blitzkrieg. Battles could drag on for months, with soldiers facing harsh conditions, scarce supplies, and the ever-present specter of disease. War was less a glorious adventure and more a grim endurance test, where survival was the ultimate victory. And while Nebuchadnezzar's campaigns expanded Babylon's borders, they also stretched his resources to the limit. Each conquest was a double-edged sword, bringing new lands, but also new challenges, like unruly populations and the constant need to defend those sprawling borders. It was a game of whack-a-mole on an imperial scale, with threats popping up faster than they could be hammered down. As the sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the city, you can almost hear the murmurs of Babylon's political elite, gathered in palace halls to plot and scheme. The court of Nebuchadnezzar was a hotbed of intrigue, where advisors whispered advice and rivals plotted their next move. It was a place where loyalty was as fluid as the Euphrates, and power was the ultimate currency. Yet, amidst the machinations and maneuvers, there was a certain undeniable allure to Babylon's political scene. It was a world where ambition was rewarded and cunning was currency. Nebuchadnezzar himself was a master of this game, balancing diplomacy and warfare with the skill of a seasoned juggler. Under his reign, Babylon wasn't just a city. It was the epicenter of an empire, a beacon of power in a world teetering on the brink of chaos. So, as the stars begin to twinkle above, casting their ancient light on this city of contradictions, take a moment to reflect on the legacy of Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylon. It's a tale of ambition and avarice, of dreams built on the backs of armies and the whispers of diplomats. A story that, despite its age, still resonates with a modern world all too familiar with the complexities of power and politics. And with that, the stage is set for the next chapter in our Babylonian saga. As the night wraps the city in its velvet embrace, we leave you with more questions than answers, more myths than certainties. A fitting end to a day in the life of ancient Babylon, where the lines between legend and reality blur and history is as alive as the bustling streets themselves. Now, as the stars flicker above a city that sleeps fitfully, let's take a closer look at the invisible threads weaving Babylon together, its religious life. Because, let's be honest, if you thought today's world was driven by influence and Instagram likes, Babylon was all about the divine shout-outs. Religion wasn't just a Sunday affair. It was an all-consuming force that permeated every aspect of life from dawn till dusk and beyond. At the heart of this spiritual tapestry stood the ziggurat, that quintessential Babylonian structure rising like a man-made mountain, reaching for the heavens. The most famous, the Eremenenki, also known as the Tower of Babel to some, was said to be 91 meters tall. That's about the height of a modern 30-story building, making it a skyscraper by ancient standards. Unlike today's glass and steel giants, though, it was built of mud bricks, because nothing says permanence quite like sun-baked clay. But more than just an architectural marvel, the ziggurat was the spiritual epicenter, a place where gods and humans could almost rub elbows. At its summit, priests conducted rituals aimed at appeasing the gods, who were believed to watch over everything from crop cycles to military conquests. This wasn't just about public show. It was about controlling the uncontrollable, managing the whims of fate through divine intervention. The ziggurat was a beacon of hope, a divine heartline, if you will, where the priests did more than just pray. They negotiated. And speaking of gods, Babylon's pantheon was as crowded as Times Square on New Year's Eve. The head honcho was Marduk, the national deity, whose statue was paraded through the city during the New Year festival like the ancient world's answer to a celebrity cameo. His importance was not just religious, but also political, as Marduk's favor was seen as essential for the king's legitimacy. In other words, having Marduk in your corner was like having the ultimate divine endorsement, a celestial thumbs-up that made or broke reigns. Marduk didn't work alone, though. He was joined by a host of other deities, each presiding over specific aspects of life. There was Ishtar, goddess of love and war, talk about a versatile portfolio, and Nabu, god of wisdom and writing, a favorite among scribes and scholars. These gods weren't just distant figures. They were part of daily life, their stories and attributes shaping everything from personal virtues to public policy. But let's not romanticize it too much. Religion in Babylon was as much about social control as it was about spiritual enlightenment. Temples were economic powerhouses, owning land and employing a vast workforce. They were the ancient equivalent of multinational corporations, wielding influence that extended well beyond the spiritual realm. The priests, with their elaborate rituals and exclusive access to the divine, were the original gatekeepers, ensuring that the divine will, interpreted, of course, through their lens, was followed to the letter. And while we're at it, let's talk about those rituals. They weren't just about incense and chanting. They often involved animal sacrifices, feasting, and even more esoteric practices aimed at divination. The priests were not just intermediaries. They were the ancient world's event planners, organizing festivals that would put Coachella to shame. The highlight was the Akiru Festival, a 12-day New Year celebration that combined religious rites with a healthy dose of political theater. During this event, the king would symbolically humble himself before Marduk, reaffirming his role as both a servant of the gods and a ruler of men. It was a public spectacle that reinforced the social order while providing the citizens with a sense of unity and purpose. Now, let's debunk a few myths, shall we? Babylon often gets a bad rap, thanks to its portrayal in various religious texts as a sinful city destined for divine wrath. But the reality is more nuanced. Yes, Babylon was a place of excess, but it was also a center of learning and culture. The Hanging Gardens, while likely mythical, symbolized this blend of opulence and innovation. And while the city was occasionally at odds with its neighbors, it was also a hub of trade and diplomacy, a place where ideas flowed as freely as goods. And what about the infamous fall of Babylon? Well, It wasn't the dramatic collapse that Hollywood loves to portray. In 539 BCE, when Cyrus the Great of Persia took the city, it was more of a peaceful takeover than a fiery downfall. Cyrus portrayed himself as a liberator, respecting Babylonian customs and even participating in local religious practices. The city continued to thrive under Persian rule, maintaining its status as a cultural and economic powerhouse. So why does Babylon still capture our imaginations? Perhaps it's because, despite its challenges and contradictions, it represents the eternal human struggle to balance ambition and morality, order and chaos. Babylon was a city of dreams, sometimes realized, sometimes shattered, a testament to the heights and depths of human endeavor. As you prepare to drift off to sleep, ponder this. Babylon, with all its grandeur and grit, offers a mirror to our own world. Its stories remind us that history is not a distant realm, but a living tapestry that continues to shape our lives. Whether through the towering ziggurats or the whisper of ancient prayers, Babylon speaks to the enduring quest for meaning in a world forever on the brink of transformation. In a twist of fate that only history could write, the kingdom of Axum, nestled in what we now call Ethiopia and Eritrea, emerged as a powerhouse at the crossroads of the ancient world. We're talking about a kingdom that didn't just dabble in trade, it feasted on it, like a hungry kid at an all-you-can-eat buffet. But before we dive into the nitty-gritty of Axum's rise to glory, let's entertain the founding legend that gives this tale a splash of royal drama. Enter Menelik I, the supposed love child of Israel's King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. According to Ethiopian lore, this guy was the original son of a king, before Disney made it cool. Legend has it that Menelik brought the Ark of the Covenant to Axum, a claim so bold it would make Indiana Jones blush. Sure, this story has more holes than Swiss cheese, but let's not let facts get in the way of a good yarn. Now, peeling back the mythical layers, let's talk geography, the real MVP of Axum's success story. Perched near the Red Sea, Axum was strategically positioned like a seasoned chess player, ready to call checkmate on any trade route. This was no accident. The kingdom was a stone's throw from major trading partners, Arabia, India, and even the far-off Roman Empire. Forget GPS. Axum had the world's trade map in its backyard. In the early centuries AD, this location was no small potatoes. It was a golden ticket to the economic Willy Wonka factory. By the 3rd century, Axum was minting its own coins, a sure sign it was ready to play in the big leagues. Archaeological digs have unearthed these coins, stamped with the likenesses of their kings, practically screaming, "Hey world, we're open for business." Trade in Axum wasn't just about bartering spices and silk. This was a full-blown marketplace dealing in gold, ivory, and the ever-popular frankincense and myrrh. And let's not forget about the exotic animals. Nothing says status like a pet elephant from India. Axum's merchants were the original globetrotters, making connections faster than a social media influencer at a networking event. Forget the notion of a sleepy backwater kingdom. Axum was a vibrant, cosmopolitan hub, a place where cultures collided and new ideas sparked like flint against stone. It was here that Christianity took root in Africa, long before it became the continent's dominant faith. By the 4th century, King Ezana had declared Christianity the state religion, a move as bold as trading in your old Nokia for the latest smartphone. Archaeological evidence speaks volumes where legends whisper. Excavations around Axum have revealed grand stelae, towering obelisks carved from single blocks of stone, standing as silent sentinels to the kingdom's past glory. These aren't just fancy tombstones. They were the billboards of their day, proclaiming Axum's power and prestige to anyone within sight. But while the legend of Menelik I and the Ark of the Covenant spins, a tale fit for Hollywood, it's the practical, hard-nosed realities of trade and geography that truly built Axum's kingdom. This was a place where the rubber met the road, where the blend of myth and commerce forged an empire that would leave an indelible mark on history. As we unravel the story of Axum, one thing becomes clear. This kingdom was more than just a footnote in the annals of time. It was a juggernaut that helped shape the ancient world. As the tale of Axum unfolds, it's clear that the kingdom's power wasn't just built on a foundation of tall tales and towering obelisks. No, the real magic was in its economic engine, a roaring beast fueled by trade and agriculture that would have Jeff Bezos nodding in approval. Axum wasn't just a player in the ancient world economy, it was the game changer, strategically positioned to make the most of the bustling trade routes crisscrossing Africa, Arabia, and beyond. Let's talk numbers. By the time the 3rd century rolled around, Axum was minting coins like a hipster bakery churns out artisanal sourdough. These weren't just any coins, mind you, stamped with the faces of their kings and inscribed with ancient jazz script. They were the Bitcoin of their day, facilitating trade across continents. If you were a merchant trading in the bustling markets of ancient Rome or the spice-laden bazaars of India, you probably jangled a few Axumite coins in your pocket. And here's a fun fact. Axum was the first African kingdom to produce its own currency. That's right. Long before the euro or the dollar, Axum had a financial system that would give Wall Street a run for its money. Now, about those trade routes. Picture this. Axum was the ancient world's equivalent of a global shipping hub, like Singapore with a dash of Indiana Jones adventure. The kingdom's location near the Red Sea was its golden ticket, allowing it to control the flow of goods between the mighty Roman Empire to the north and the exotic lands of Arabia, India, and even China to the east. Their ships, sturdy and swift, filled the Red Sea ports, laden with treasures that dazzled the ancient world. We're talking ivory that gleamed like polished marble, gold that shimmered in the sun, and the infamous frankincense and myrrh, prized items that traveled far and wide like the rock stars of the ancient trade scene. But it wasn't just about what Axum exported. Oh no, the kingdom had a taste for the finer things in life. Silk, spices, and other luxury goods flowed into Axum, transforming its capital into a cosmopolitan hub where merchants and traders from around the world gathered to make deals that would echo through history. The very air buzzed with languages and dialects, a testament to Axum's role as a melting pot of cultures and ideas. You could almost hear the clinking of coins and the rustle of fine silk as the ancient marketplace hummed with life. Axum's agricultural prowess also played a critical role in its economic engine. The kingdom's fertile lands, nourished by seasonal rains, produced a bounty of crops that kept its population well fed and its markets plentiful. Wheat, barley, and teff, a local grain that's still a staple in Ethiopian cuisine today, flourished under the careful watch of Axumite farmers. Their agricultural techniques were advanced for their time, maximizing yields and sustaining the kingdom's growth even as its influence spread far and wide. It's easy to romanticize Axum as a glittering beacon of ancient prosperity, but let's not forget the hard-nosed reality that underpinned its success. This was a kingdom that understood the power of economic leverage, using its strategic location and natural resources to bend the ancient world to its will. Axum's leaders were shrewd operators, deftly navigating the complex web of alliances and rivalries that characterized the ancient geopolitical landscape. They knew that control of trade routes meant power, and they were more than willing to play the game to ensure their kingdom's survival and success. While the legends of Menelik, I and the Ark of the Covenant add a layer of mystique to Axum's history, the real story lies in the kingdom's economic might and strategic savvy. It's a tale of trade winds and coinage, of bustling ports and fertile fields, of a kingdom that rose to prominence not just through myth, but through the very real power of commerce and agriculture. The story of Axum is far from over, and as we continue to explore its rise and fall, one thing is certain. This kingdom's legacy is as rich and complex as the trade networks that once carried its name across the ancient world. As we dive deeper into the story of Axum, it's time to swap our trader hats for something a little more corporate, because the kings of Axum were less like monarchs and more like the CEOs of a Fortune 500 company. These guys were running a kingdom that was a veritable gold mine, and they knew it. The political landscape of Axum was a chessboard, and the kings were grandmasters, making moves that would make even Barbie Fisher do a double take. The helm of this political juggernaut were kings who understood that power wasn't just inherited. It was earned, cultivated, and wielded with precision. Axumite rulers were adept at forming alliances and managing rivalries with the finesse of a diplomat and the cunning of a Wall Street shark. Their connections stretched across continents, from the sun-soaked shores of the Roman Empire to the spice-laden coasts of India. In a world where alliances could be as volatile as cryptocurrency, Axum's kings played the long game, building relationships that would fortify their kingdoms standing on the global stage. Let's talk about King Ezana, the monarch who took a page out of Apple's playbook and rebranded his kingdom with a religious pivot that was nothing short of genius. Around 330 AD, Ezana made the bold move to convert to Christianity, not just for spiritual enlightenment, but as a strategic masterstroke. This wasn't just a leap of faith. It was a calculated maneuver to solidify ties with the Roman Empire, which was becoming increasingly Christianized under the influence of Constantine. Ezana's conversion was like swapping out your flip phone for the latest iPhone. Suddenly, Axum was in sync with one of the most powerful empires of the time. And what did this conversion mean for Axum? For starters, it helped legitimize the kingdom in the eyes of Christian merchants and traders who were more inclined to do business with a fellow believer. It also provided a moral high ground that was as advantageous as it was pious. The cross became a symbol not just of faith, but of a new political identity that resonated with the burgeoning Christian world. Coins minted during Ezana's reign even bore Christian symbols, a tangible testament to this seismic shift in religious and political strategy. Ezana wasn't just playing the religion card. He was stacking the deck with alliances that spanned the known world. The kingdom's diplomatic relationships with Rome were like a handshake deal with a Silicon Valley giant. It opened doors and created opportunities for trade and influence. Meanwhile, ties with India ensured that Axum was never far from the exotic spices and luxury goods that kept its economy humming. In this way, the kings of Axum were less about crowns and more about capital, driving their kingdom forward with the kind of savvy that would make any modern entrepreneur proud. But before you start picturing these kings lounging around in boardrooms, let's set one thing straight. The political arena of Axum was as cutthroat as any Game of Thrones storyline. Rivalries within and beyond its borders required constant vigilance and an iron grip on power. The kingdom's leaders had to navigate a landscape where enemies were as plentiful as trade goods. Neighboring kingdoms, vying for a piece of the trade pie, often posed threats that needed to be neutralized with either diplomacy or a show of military might. Axum's military prowess wasn't just for show. It was a formidable force that backed up its political ambitions. The kingdom's army was well organized and capable, a necessary deterrent against rivals who might be tempted to challenge Axum's supremacy. The strategic location near the Red Sea wasn't just a boon for trade. It was a defensive stronghold that Axum's rulers were keenly aware of. Control of the sea routes meant control of commerce, and the kings were not about to let anyone else play captain on their ship. Yet, despite the harsh realities of political maneuvering, there's a romantic allure to the tale of Axum's kings. Their ability to blend religion, diplomacy, and military strategy into a cohesive narrative of power is nothing short of legendary. They were the rock stars of their day, orchestrating a symphony of alliances and trade deals that echoed across continents. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Behind the glamorous facade were the hard choices and calculated risks that kept the kingdom afloat. Axumite rulers understood that in the Game of Thrones, ancient or otherwise, you either win or you become a footnote in history. They were masters of reinvention, continually adapting to the changing tides of politics and commerce. This adaptability was their superpower, allowing Axum to remain a dominant force in a world where change was the only constant. As our exploration of Axum's political landscape continues, it's clear that the kingdom's story is far from over. The rise and fall of Axum is a saga of innovation and intrigue, where the lines between myth and reality blur into a tapestry of human ambition and resilience. So, hold on to your hats, whether they're crowns or corporate caps, because there's more to unravel in this epic tale of ancient power and prestige. As we peel back another layer of Axum's storied past, we're about to hit the peak of its might, a zenith that would make even the most stoic of history buffs do a double take. Axum wasn't just flexing its muscles, it was bench-pressing the ancient world, and boy, did it have the receipts to prove it. The kingdom's influence stretched like a well-rolled piece of dough, reaching across vast territories while its legacy was carved, literally, into stone. Let's start with those towering obelisks, shall we? Imagine strolling through Axum and being greeted by colossal stone sentinels, each one a testament to the kingdom's grandeur. These weren't your run-of-the-mill garden gnomes. They were architectural marvels, standing up to 33 meters tall, crafted from single slabs of granite. Legend has it that these obelisks were erected to mark the graves of Axum's elite. But let's not get too misty-eyed here. The real story is that these monoliths were the ancient world's equivalent of a neon sign screaming, "Welcome to Axum, where power meets stone." In a land where resources were king, these obelisks were a bold declaration of Axum's ability to marshal labor and materials on a monumental scale. But hold your chisel, there's more to this story than just impressive rock formations. While these obelisks projected an image of divine authority, the gritty reality of empire building was anything but divine. Axum's dominance wasn't just etched in stone, it was forged through conquest. The kingdom's military conquests were as strategic as a grandmaster's chess moves, expanding its territory into parts of modern-day Yemen and beyond. Axumite forces were a force to be reckoned with, utilizing both diplomacy and military might to secure territories rich in trade goods and strategic advantage. Their navy, an armada of sturdy vessels, patrolled the Red Sea like ancient coast guards, ensuring that trade routes remained firmly under Axumite control. Yet, for all its military and architectural prowess, Axum's story isn't just a chest-thumping tale of conquest. Let's ask the tough question. Was Axum a benevolent ruler or just another empire with imperial ambitions? The romanticized vision of Axum as a beacon of civilization is tempting, but it's worth noting that the kingdom's expansionist policies often left a trail of subjugated peoples in their wake. The empire's wealth was built not just on trade, but on the backs of those it conquered. Axum's rulers were adept at consolidating power, integrating diverse cultures into their realm while ensuring that the kingdom's coffers remained full. This wasn't a charity. It was a carefully orchestrated balance of power and prosperity. To get a sense of Axum's economic clout at its peak, consider this. The kingdom's control over trade routes was so effective that it could dictate terms to even the most powerful of its trading partners. Axumite coins, jingling in the pockets of merchants from Rome to India, symbolized not just currency, but influence. These coins weren't just stamped metal. They were tickets to the international trade show, accepted and respected across continents. The economic engine of Axum was a well-oiled machine, humming along on a blend of agriculture, trade, and the occasional show of force. But let's not forget the human element in this grand tale of empire. Axum's society was a mosaic of cultures, languages, and beliefs, where traders and travelers from far-flung corners of the world converged. This cultural melting pot was both a strength and a source of tension as the kingdom navigated the complexities of governing a diverse populace. The introduction of Christianity added another layer to this tapestry, reshaping social norms and political alliances in ways that were as profound as they were pragmatic. While the romantic tales of Menelik, I and the Ark of the Covenant add a touch of Hollywood flair to Axum's history, the kingdom's legacy is grounded in the tangible realities of power, trade, and architecture. The obelisks stand as silent witnesses to an age of ambition and achievement, a reminder that Axum was more than just a footnote in history. It was a powerhouse that shaped the ancient world in ways that continue to echo today. As we continue to unravel the saga of Axum, it's clear that this kingdom's story is one of contrasts, a blend of romantic myth and harsh reality, of architectural grandeur and military might. The rise and fall of Axum is a tale of human ambition, where the pursuit of power and prosperity was as relentless as the tides that lapped at its shores. But don't pack away your time-travel gear just yet. There's more to explore in this epic journey through the annals of history. Stay tuned, because the story of Axum is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as enthralling. As we wade into Axum's decline, let's ditch the romanticized notion of a kingdom going out with a dramatic crash, like a rock band smashing guitars at their final gig. No, Axum's fall was more of a slow fade, a gradual diminuendo that took centuries rather than moments. Picture a once vibrant tapestry, slowly unraveling thread by thread, each strand representing a complex interplay of environmental shifts, economic pressures, and external forces that ultimately tip the balance. First up, let's talk about climate, because nothing spells trouble like Mother Nature throwing a tantrum. Around the 6th century, Axum faced significant environmental changes that would make any meteorologist's eyebrows shoot up. The once dependable seasonal rains started playing hard to get, turning fertile lands into parched stretches of disappointment. This wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a sucker punch to Axum's agricultural backbone. Crops like teff and barley that had sustained the kingdom's growth found themselves struggling to keep up. Food shortages crept in like uninvited guests at a dinner party, slowly but surely kneecapping the economy. And if that wasn't enough to make Axum's rulers reach for the ancient equivalent of stress balls, let's throw in a dash of economic upheaval for good measure. The bustling trade routes that had once been Axum's lifeblood started shifting like tectonic plates. As the Islamic Caliphate rose to prominence, new trade networks bypassed Axum, favoring routes that hugged the Arabian Peninsula. Think of it as the ancient world's version of losing your top spot on the social media algorithm. Axum's once coveted position on the global trade stage dwindled, leaving its economy gasping for relevance. External pressures. Axum had those in spades. The kingdom wasn't operating in a vacuum. It was nestled in a region where political tensions simmered like a pot about to boil over. The rise of neighboring powers, like the Nubians to the west and the Persians to the northeast, meant Axum was constantly playing defense. These rival powers weren't just neighbors. They were like overly competitive siblings, ready to swoop in and claim the larger slice of the proverbial pie. Axum's military might, once a cornerstone of its strength, found itself stretched thin as it tried to counter these emerging threats. Now, let's debunk the idea of a sudden collapse. Axum didn't fall in a dramatic, cinematic fashion. It unraveled over time, like a slow-motion train wreck you can't look away from. The kingdom's decline was more akin to watching a once great sports team slowly lose its edge season after season. By the 7th century, Axum's influence had waned significantly, its former territories slipping through its fingers like sand in an hourglass. This wasn't a single catastrophic event, but a gradual erosion of power and influence. But before you start reaching for the tissues, let's pivot to the silver lining, Axum's enduring legacy. While the kingdom itself may have faded, its cultural and historical footprint left an indelible mark on the region. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'll find Axum's legacy alive and well in modern Ethiopia. Christianity, which took root in Axum, remains a cornerstone of Ethiopian culture, a testament to the kingdom's lasting influence. Those iconic obelisks still stand today, silent guardians of a bygone era, drawing tourists and historians alike to marvel at their grandeur. As we wrap up this tale, it's worth reflecting on how history often prefers a good story over the messy truth. Axum's decline wasn't a tale of sudden doom, but a complex narrative of adaptation and survival. It reminds us that the stories we tell about the past are as much about the present as they are about what actually happened. Axum's story, with its blend of myth and reality, offers a poignant lesson in the resilience of human ambition and the ever-changing tides of history. So, there you have it, the rise and fall of Axum, a kingdom that once shone brightly at the crossroads of the ancient world. Its legacy is as multifaceted as the obelisks it left behind, reminding us that history is never just a straight line. It's a tapestry woven with threads of triumph, struggle, and enduring influence. As you drift off to sleep, take comfort in knowing that, while Axum may have faded, its impact continues to echo through the annals of time, a testament to the enduring dance between myth and reality. In the bustling town of Torun, Poland, the year was 1473, and the local stork population was overworked from delivering future geniuses. Enter Nicolaus Copernicus, a baby boy destined to give our cozy geocentric universe a major wake-up call. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before he could rearrange the cosmos, he had to survive the trials of medieval childhood, which was a bit like a live-action game of don't die of dysentery. Now, Copernicus didn't just pop out of nowhere, ready to upend centuries of astronomical dogma. Nope, he had some help along the way. Cue Uncle Lucas Watsonroad, a man with a title as grand as his ambitions, Prince Bishop of Warmia. Think of him as the medieval equivalent of that cool uncle who slips you a 20 and says, "Go buy yourself something nice," only instead of cash. Uncle Lucas was doling out education. Lucas knew the power of a good education. After all, he had clout to maintain and a bishopric to run. So, he took young Nicolaus under his wing ensuring that the boy's brain would be stuffed with more than just Latin and theology. This was no small feat given the time. In the 15th century, the average education involved a lot more chanting in cold stone rooms and a lot less critical thinking. But Lucas was a man with a vision, and he had his sights set on Krakow. The University of Krakow, now known as Jagiellonian University, was the place where young minds went to be sharpened. Founded in 1364, it was a bit like the Hogwarts of Poland, minus the magic, plus a lot more Latin. There, Copernicus was exposed to the great thinkers of the past. He probably spent his days nose-deep in books, grappling with the works of Aristotle and Ptolemy, all while trying to avoid the plague and the occasional university riot. Yes, even back then, students loved a good protest. Copernicus's years in Krakow were formative, but they weren't enough to quench his thirst for knowledge, or Italian wine, which he'd soon discover. So off he went to Italy, a country that was practically a living museum of Renaissance thought. If his life were a movie, this would be the study abroad montage, complete with scenic Tuscan landscapes and lots of toga-clad philosophers gesturing wildly. In Italy, Copernicus hit the books at Bologna, Padua, and Ferrara. Think of it as the Ivy League tour of the 16th century. Each of these places offered its own flavor of learning and contributed to what would become Copernicus's revolutionary ideas. In Bologna, he hooked up with Domenico Maria Novara, an astronomer who was not afraid to challenge the status quo. Novara was a bit of a rebel, and under his mentorship, Copernicus learned that it was okay to question the great Ptolemy. This was the beginning of Nicolaus's slow but steady breakup with the geocentric model. Meanwhile, in Padua, Copernicus dabbled in medicine. It was a practical choice. After all, being an astronomer wasn't exactly a lucrative career. Doctors were the rock stars of the Renaissance, minus the groupies, and with a lot more leeches. This medical training would come in handy later in life, though Copernicus's true love was always the stars. But let's not forget the real treasure Copernicus found in Italy, a fondness for Italian wine. The man was known to enjoy a good vintage, and who could blame him? After a day of pondering the heavens, a glass of Chianti was probably just what the doctor ordered, literally, given his medical studies. By the time Copernicus returned to Poland, he was a man transformed. He had absorbed the Renaissance spirit, a heady mix of new ideas and old wine, and was ready to start turning the world on its head, though he'd take his time doing it. After all, revolutionizing astronomy isn't something you rush. It requires patience, persistence, and preferably a well-stocked wine cellar. Back in Poland, Copernicus was undoubtedly carrying more intellectual baggage than a philosophy major with a double minor in skepticism and existential crisis. But it wasn't all stargazing and pondering for our Renaissance man. You see, Copernicus had bills to pay and responsibilities to uphold, and what better way to blend the two than by embracing a dual career in the church and finance? Yes, folks, before he was the starry-eyed astronomer we know today, he was a canon at Frombork Cathedral. Now, don't let the title fool you. Being a canon was less about divine revelations and more about administrative headaches. Copernicus's role as a canon involved tasks that were as glamorous as they sound, managing properties, overseeing finances, and ensuring the cathedral's affairs ran smoother than a well-oiled abacus. It was a position secured, once again, by his well-connected Uncle Lucas, who clearly had a knack for nepotism. This job wasn't just a side gig. It was his main source of income, providing enough financial stability to indulge in his true passion, playing cosmic detective. But hold onto your telescopes, because we're about to dive into Copernicus's less celebrated yet equally fascinating role as an economic advisor. Yes, before Bitcoin and blockchain, there was Copernicus and the Prussian currency reform. The 16th century was a time when money was as unpredictable as a Game of Thrones finale. Coins were being debased more frequently than celebrity reputations on social media. Enter Copernicus, the unlikely fiscal hero, who was asked to tackle this monetary mess. In 1517, while Martin Luther was busy nailing theses to church doors, Copernicus was penning his own revolutionary ideas, albeit in the realm of economics. He composed a treatise on monetary reform, criticizing the rampant debasement of currency, a move that was as bold as it was necessary. His work, Monety Cudendi Ratio, on the minting of coin, laid out the principles that would later influence the likes of Thomas Gresham. His central argument was simple yet profound. Bad money drives out good. It's a concept now known as Gresham's law, but make no mistake, Copernicus was laying the groundwork. Imagine a medieval economist channeling his inner Warren Buffett, suggesting that stable currency was as crucial to a nation's health as a balanced diet is to a Renaissance waistline. Unfortunately, his ideas didn't catapult him into the top echelons of financial fame. No stock market ticker symbol suddenly bore his name. Instead, his recommendations were largely ignored during his lifetime. Turns out, medieval finance was just as resistant to change as the modern iteration. Amidst his financial reform efforts, Copernicus was also juggling the less glamorous duties of canon life, which often involved navigating the treacherous waters of ecclesiastical politics. This was an era when church politics made House of Cards look like a playground spat. But somewhere between balancing the books and dodging church intrigue, Copernicus found time to scribble down his astronomical musings. The seeds of heliocentrism were being planted, albeit slowly, and with the caution of a man who knew his ideas could land him in hot ecclesiastical water. Now, let's sidestep into the realm of Copernicus's astronomical pursuits. It's worth noting that our man wasn't conducting his skyward observations with a telescope. Galileo wouldn't invent that game changer until the early 1600. Nope, Copernicus was working with the naked eye and some rather rudimentary instruments like the astrolabe and armillary sphere. Picture him squinting at the heavens, mentally rearranging celestial furniture, while everyone else was still content with Earth's prime spot in the universe. Copernicus's heliocentric theory didn't come in a sudden eureka moment, but rather it unfolded like a slow-cooked Renaissance stew. He began to seriously question the geocentric model, which had been in vogue since Ptolemy laid it out in the 2nd century. It was a model that placed Earth firmly at the center of the universe, with everything else doing cosmic cartwheels around it. Copernicus, however, had the audacity to suggest that maybe Earth wasn't the cosmic VIP it thought it was. As he pieced together his heliocentric theory, Copernicus faced a dilemma. How do you tell a world that's been spinning the wrong way for millennia that it's time to reverse course? The stakes were high. Galileo would later face house arrest for championing these ideas. But Copernicus had an ace up his sleeve: timing. He was meticulous, cautious, and perhaps a bit hesitant, like someone who knew they were sitting on a powder keg of astronomical TNT. Despite the administrative duties that kept him tethered to earthly concerns, Copernicus's mind was forever wandering among the stars. It was a balancing act worthy of the Renaissance's greatest tightrope artists. By day, he was the dependable canon, ensuring the cathedral coffers didn't run dry. By night, he was the revolutionary thinker, sketching out the solar system's new seeding arrangement. And so, Copernicus continued his dual life, navigating the world of high finance and church bureaucracy, while slowly, methodically, constructing a framework that would eventually flip the script on our understanding of the cosmos. He might not have been a Fortune 500 figure, but in his own quiet way, he was setting the stage for one of the greatest revolutions in scientific thought. Stay tuned, because the celestial drama is far from over, and our reluctant revolutionary is just getting started. And so, Copernicus found himself juggling the celestial and the terrestrial, all while quietly plotting a cosmic coup d'etat. Picture this: our soon-to-be revolutionary, tucked away in a dimly lit study, surrounded by dusty manuscripts and an insatiable curiosity, scribbling equations and contemplating the heavens. His heliocentric theory was fermenting slowly, much like the Italian wines he'd grown fond of. But unlike a fine Chianti, it wasn't something he was eager to uncork. Why the hesitation, you ask? Well, if you were about to propose that Earth wasn't the universe's main stage, but rather a supporting actor, you'd be cautious too. Copernicus had good reason to tread carefully. This was a time when the church held a monopoly on cosmic truth, and they were about as flexible as a steel beam when it came to changing their minds. A wrong move, and he could find himself in hot water, or worse, facing an angry mob with pitchforks who weren't exactly known for their scientific curiosity. This reluctance to publish wasn't just about self-preservation, though that was certainly part of it. Copernicus was also a meticulous perfectionist. He wanted to get it right, and the math was no walk in the park. Imagine trying to solve a Rubik's Cube with one hand tied behind your back, and you'll get the idea. He spent years refining his model, painstakingly calculating planetary orbits and challenging the Ptolemaic system with the precision of a Renaissance surgeon. Despite these hurdles, the concept of heliocentrism was gaining ground in his mind. Copernicus envisioned a universe where the sun was the star of the show, with Earth and the other planets playing dutiful supporting roles in a cosmic ballet. It was a radical departure from the geocentric view that had dominated for centuries, where Earth sat smugly at the center of everything, like a medieval Kardashian. But let's not forget the social and economic context that shaped his work. In the 16th century, Europe was a hotbed of change, with the Reformation shaking the very foundations of the Church. This period saw the rise of humanism and a renewed interest in ancient texts, which encouraged scholars to question established doctrines. Copernicus was very much a product of his time, standing on the shoulders of giants like Ptolemy, yet daring to peer beyond the horizon. Enter De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium, Copernicus's magnum opus, a work that would eventually turn the scientific world on its head. Published in 1543, the same year Henry Roman VIII was busy marrying Catherine Parr, his sixth wife. It was a cosmic coincidence that two seismic events were unfolding simultaneously. While Henry was busy reshuffling his marital lineup, Copernicus was redefining our place in the universe. Now, let's talk about the book itself. It wasn't exactly a page-turner by today's standards, more like a brick of dense Latin prose that required a PhD in patience to get through. But it was revolutionary, proposing a model where the sun reigned supreme and the planets, including Earth, orbited around it. The book contained 6 sections, including detailed mathematical proofs that supported his heliocentric theory. It was a bold move, one that placed him at odds with the prevailing geocentric view championed by the Church. Copernicus's decision to publish was a gamble. He was well aware that his ideas would be controversial, to say the least. But by this point, he was in his 70s, and with one foot in the grave, the fear of backlash might have seemed less daunting. After all, the worst that could happen was posthumous condemnation, which, while not ideal, beat a live roasting at the stake. The significance of De Revolutionibus cannot be overstated. It was the match that lit the fuse of the scientific revolution, challenging centuries of dogma and paving the way for future astronomers like Kepler and Galileo. They would later refine and expand upon his ideas, but it was Copernicus who laid the groundwork, daring to suggest that we weren't the center of the universe after all. Interestingly, the book's preface, penned by a Lutheran clergyman named Andreas Osiander, without Copernicus's consent, presented the heliocentric model as a mere mathematical tool rather than a literal description of the cosmos. This clever bit of PR helped soften the book's reception, allowing it to circulate without immediately inciting the wrath of the Church. It was a shrewd move, akin to slipping a controversial topic into casual dinner conversation and hoping no one chokes on their soup. Yet, despite this preemptive spin, the book wasn't exactly flying off the shelves like the latest bestseller. Its impact was initially limited, as it was written in Latin, the language of scholars, which kept it out of the hands of the general public. But among the academic elite, it sparked debates and sowed the seeds of doubt in the geocentric model. Imagine the whispers in university halls and the quiet discussions among learned men as they pondered this audacious proposal. Was it possible that everything they'd been taught was wrong? That Earth was just another planet, hurtling through space at breakneck speed? It was a thrilling, terrifying thought, one that would take decades to fully take root. Copernicus's reluctance to publish, while understandable, limited the initial spread of his ideas. But in the grand scheme of things, his work was a slow burn, a fuse that once lit couldn't be extinguished. It marked a turning point in the history of science, a shift from a universe governed by divine decree to one where observation and mathematics reigned supreme. In the end, Copernicus's heliocentric theory was like a fine wine, better with age. It took time for the world to catch up, for other scientists to build upon his foundation, and for the Church to grudgingly acknowledge the validity of his ideas. It was a testament to the power of perseverance, the triumph of inquiry over dogma, and the enduring legacy of one man's quest to understand the cosmos. So here we are, on the brink of a new era in astronomy, with Copernicus having set the stage for the giants who would follow. His work was the catalyst that propelled humanity into a new understanding of the universe. And though he didn't live to see the full impact of his ideas, his legacy endures. Stay tuned, because the story of the cosmos is far from over, and the celestial revolution Copernicus began is just getting warmed up. Despite Copernicus's celestial revelation being more of a slow burn than a supernova, it eventually sparked a quiet revolution in the dusty corridors of academia. This wasn't the kind of revolution you'd see on a Netflix docuseries. No sudden epiphanies or dramatic confrontations with angry mobs. Instead, it was a gradual shift, like trying to turn a massive cruise ship around using a Bic lighter as your only tool. Now, let's dive into the juicy details of the scientific community's reaction to Copernicus's heliocentric model. Spoiler alert, it wasn't an instant hit. You see, changing minds in the 16th century was about as easy as convincing a cat to take a bath. In fact, De Revolutionibus was initially met with a blend of intrigue, skepticism, and a good measure of let's just wait and see. The book was published in the scholarly Latin, which was a bit like releasing a pop album exclusively in Morse code. Great for those who could decipher it, but lost on the general populace. Among the first to take notice were astronomers and mathematicians, those brave souls who dared to peek under the hood of the universe. They were intrigued, sure, but also cautious. After all, Ptolemy's geocentric model was like the apple of the astronomical world, ubiquitous, trusted, and not easily replaced. Copernicus's theory was proposing an entirely new operating system, and not everyone was ready to update. One such astronomer was Georg Joachim Rheticus, a young professor from Wittenberg, who was possibly Copernicus's biggest fanboy. Rheticus was so enamored with the idea of a sun-centered universe that he took a sabbatical to visit Copernicus in Poland. He spent 2 years there, learning directly from the master and eventually publishing a booklet, Narratio Prima, which was essentially the first fan review of heliocentrism. Rheticus's enthusiasm helped Copernicus's ideas gain some traction, but it was like trying to light a bonfire with damp matches. Meanwhile, the church was busy balancing its own cosmic books. Initially, the reaction from ecclesiastical authorities was a shrug of indifference. The heliocentric model was seen as a mathematical exercise, not a theological threat. Why? Because the church was preoccupied with more pressing matters, like the Protestant Reformation and its pesky habit of peeling off congregants faster than a bad sunburn. Plus, Andreas Osiander's sneaky preface had framed the heliocentric model as hypothetical, giving the church some wiggle room to ignore it, at least temporarily. But let's not paint the scientific community as a monolithic body of enlightened thinkers. There were those who clung to the geocentric model like it was a life raft in a sea of uncertainty. Martin Luther, for instance, was less than impressed. He reportedly dismissed Copernicus as a fool who wanted to reverse the entire science of astronomy. Luther's reaction was emblematic of a larger mindset. Heliocentrism was seen by many as an affront to the natural order, a disorderly interloper at the cosmic cocktail party. Even among those who were open to re-evaluating the universe's seeding chart, acceptance was slow. It was like trying to get your parents to switch from dial-up to broadband, possible, but requiring patience and persistence. It took decades, centuries even, for Copernicus's ideas to fully permeate the intellectual landscape. His work laid the groundwork, but it was up to future astronomers like Johannes Kepler and Galileo Galilei to hammer home the final nails in the geocentric coffin. Kepler, a German mathematician and astronomer, was a pivotal figure in this celestial drama. He took Copernicus's heliocentric model and added his own twist, proposing that planets moved in elliptical orbits rather than perfect circles. This was a game changer, akin to adding a crucial plot twist in the third act of a thriller. Kepler's laws of planetary motion provided the mathematical backbone that Copernicus's theory had been missing, making it more palatable to skeptics. Galileo, meanwhile, was the charismatic rebel who brought Copernicus's ideas to the public eye like a Renaissance rock star. With his telescope, a device Copernicus never had the pleasure of using, Galileo made groundbreaking observations that supported heliocentrism. When he pointed his telescope at Jupiter and discovered its moons, It was a cosmic mic drop moment. The existence of these moons challenged the notion that everything orbited Earth and lent credibility to Copernicus's model. But Galileo's advocacy came at a cost. Unlike Copernicus, who managed to dodge the ecclesiastical ire during his lifetime, Galileo found himself in hot water. His open support for heliocentrism landed him in a showdown with the Inquisition, culminating in a trial and a sentence of house arrest. It was a stark reminder that while the gears of scientific progress were turning, they often ground slowly and with considerable friction. The Church eventually did take a more critical stance on heliocentrism, but this came long after Copernicus had shuffled off this mortal coil. In 1616, the Catholic Church placed De Revolutionibus on its list of prohibited books, albeit with the caveat that certain passages needed correction. It was a classic case of slamming the barn door shut after the horse had long bolted and was frolicking in the fields. So, what about the myth that Copernicus was either instantly celebrated as a hero or reviled as a heretic? Like many historical narratives, the truth is more nuanced. Copernicus was neither lauded nor lambasted in his lifetime. Instead, his work simmered quietly in the background, awaiting the right historical moment to explode onto the scene. His ideas were a slow-releasing capsule of genius, gradually reshaping the landscape of astronomy and beyond. Beyond the scientific community, the broader societal impact of Copernicus's work was profound, if not immediately apparent. His heliocentric model challenged the prevailing worldview, one that placed humans at the center of divine creation. By suggesting that Earth was just another planet, Copernicus inadvertently planted the seeds of more secular, human-centered philosophy. It was the kind of paradigm shift that would eventually lead to the Enlightenment, when reason and science began to take precedence over dogma and superstition. Copernicus's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. His work reminds us that sometimes the most groundbreaking ideas take time to mature, like a well-aged bottle of wine. And while he missed out on the instant feedback loop of modern social media, no tweets, likes, or viral memes to gauge the public's reaction, his ideas have stood the test of time. In the grand tapestry of history, Copernicus was the craftsman who laid the first threads of a new cosmic narrative. His heliocentric model was a quiet revolution, one that took centuries to unfold, but ultimately redefined our understanding of the universe. And though the man himself didn't live to see the full impact of his work, his legacy endures in every starry sky we gaze upon, reminding us that the quest for knowledge is an eternal journey. In the grand tapestry of history, Copernicus was the craftsman who laid the first threads of a new cosmic narrative. His heliocentric model was a quiet revolution, one that took centuries to unfold, but ultimately redefined our understanding of the universe. And though the man himself didn't live to see the full impact of his work, his legacy endures in every starry sky we gaze upon, reminding us that the quest for knowledge is an eternal journey. Fast forward a few centuries, and Copernicus's ideas had become the foundation of modern astronomy, thanks to a little help from his friends, or rather, his intellectual successors. By the 17th century, the scientific revolution was in full swing, and Copernicus's heliocentric model had become the darling of the scientific community. It was like the Beatles of astronomical theories. Everyone wanted a piece of it. Even Isaac Newton, the guy who discovered gravity while dodging apples, built on Copernicus's work. His Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, provided the mathematical proof that solidified heliocentrism and sent geocentrism packing its bags. But let's not sugarcoat it. Acceptance didn't happen overnight. Copernicus's theory was like a slow-drip coffee. It took time to percolate through the thick filter of traditional thought. The Catholic Church officially lifted its ban on heliocentric works in 1758, more than 200 years after De Revolutionibus hit the scene. Let that sink in. 2 centuries. It's like waiting for a sequel to your favorite movie, only to find out your great-great-grandkids are the ones who finally get to see it. By the time the 19th century rolled around, Copernicus was hailed as a visionary whose ideas had sparked a scientific renaissance. His heliocentric model was no longer a radical suggestion. It was established fact, taught in classrooms and revered in academia. This was a far cry from the lukewarm reception his work initially received. It's a little ironic, really. The man who was once a whisper in the back alleys of scientific discourse had become a household name, while those who scoffed at him remained firmly in obscurity. Ever heard of Martin Luther, the astronomer? Didn't think so. And let's talk about legacy because, let's face it, being remembered for centuries is no small feat. Copernicus's name now graces everything from craters on the moon to streets in Poland. You know you've made it when you've got a celestial body named after you. His life's work has inspired countless scientists, astronomers, and even pop culture references, though I'm not sure he'd recognize himself in a sci-fi blockbuster. The allure of Copernicus's story lies in its perfect blend of romance and reality. The romance is easy to spot. A lone genius, challenging the status quo, armed with nothing but his intellect and a quill. The reality, however, is less glamorous. Copernicus was a man of his time, navigating the tricky waters of ecclesiastical politics and economic instability. He was no rebellious outcast, but rather a cautious thinker, aware of the consequences of his radical ideas. Yet, despite the challenges, he persisted, driven by a relentless curiosity that transcended the limitations of his era. It's a testament to human nature that we often lionize the lone genius, the visionary who stands apart from the crowd. But in truth, Copernicus was just one link in a long chain of thinkers, each building on the work of their predecessors. He wasn't the first to propose a heliocentric model. Ancient Greek astronomers like Aristarchus of Samos had floated the idea centuries earlier. But he was the one who gave it the mathematical backbone it needed to stand the test of time. The economic and social context of Copernicus's era also played a crucial role in shaping his work. The 16th century was a time of upheaval, with the Reformation challenging the Church's authority and new trade routes expanding the known world. This was an age of exploration, both terrestrial and celestial, and Copernicus's ideas were a natural extension of that spirit of discovery. So, what can we take away from Copernicus's story? For starters, that revolution doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes, it's a quiet shift, a slow realization that the world isn't quite what we thought it was. It's also a reminder that knowledge is a cumulative endeavor, a collaboration across generations. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and each new discovery builds upon the work of those who came before. In the end, Copernicus's legacy is a testament to the power of persistence and the enduring quest for truth. His heliocentric model didn't just change our understanding of the universe, it changed our place within it. By challenging the notion that Earth was the center of everything, Copernicus opened the door to a new way of thinking, one that embraced the vastness and complexity of the cosmos. And so, as we gaze up at the night sky, perhaps with a glass of wine in hand, Italian, if we're channeling our inner Copernicus, we can appreciate the profound impact of his work. We may never know precisely how he felt as he penned De Revolutionibus, but we do know that his ideas continue to inspire, challenge, and expand our horizons. So, here's to Nicolaus Copernicus, the reluctant revolutionary who dared to imagine a world beyond our own, and in doing so, forever changed the course of history. His story is a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a journey without end, one that invites us to look beyond the familiar and embrace the unknown. Cheers to that, and to the countless explorers who follow in his footsteps, ever reaching for the stars. Marjmir, I probably never imagined people would be squabbling over his legacy via the wonders of Wi-Fi. Yet here we are, dissecting the man who decided that a cluster of territories in what is now the Czech Republic and Slovakia could be the next medieval sensation. This is your VIP pass to the great Moravian Empire, a place that punched way above its weight in the 9th century. First off, let's get our bearings straight. The great Moravian Empire wasn't some vast ocean-spanning dominion like the Roman Empire or the Mongolian horde. Nope, this was a landlocked affair, nestled in Central Europe, think Czech Republic and Slovakia today, with a bit of Austria, Hungary and Poland thrown in for good measure. It was a bit like the Switzerland of its day, minus the neutrality and chocolate. But its location was more strategic than any medieval chessboard. Sheltered by the Carpathians, and with the mighty Danube as its lifeline, it was a prime spot for trade and conquest, especially if you fancied a bit of medieval empire building. Enter Maritime, the man with a plan and a name that sounds like it belongs to a sorcerer in a fantasy novel. Maritime, who reigned from around 830 to 846, wasn't just doodling on a map. He had bigger ambitions. He wanted to turn his Moravian lands into something more than a footnote in the annals of history. And thus, the great Moravian Empire was born, or at least christened with a lot of hope and an equal measure of audacity. So how did Maritime manage to pull this off? Was it his dazzling charisma that charmed his neighbors into submission? Or was it just a classic case of being in the right place at the right time? Let's not kid ourselves. Charisma helps, but sometimes history is more about being opportunistic than charming. Maritime's empire grew not just because he had a winning smile, but because he had the uncanny ability to leverage geography and political savvy. He knew that sitting at the crossroads of trade routes was like holding the medieval equivalent of a golden ticket. Maritime wasn't just about flexing muscles either. He was a diplomat as much as he was a warrior. Sure, he could rally his troops, but he also knew when to shake hands instead of swords. This was a time when diplomacy often involved more backstabbing than Game of Thrones, and Maritime was no stranger to its intricacies. His ability to juggle alliances with Frankish kings and Slavic tribes alike was a testament to his strategic prowess. He wasn't just building an empire, he was playing a high-stakes game of political chess. And let's talk numbers here, because every empire builder loves a good stat. By the time Great Moravia hit its stride, it was home to around 300,000 people. Now, that might not sound like much compared to modern megacities, but for a medieval kingdom, it was like having a small army at your beck and call. Plus, it wasn't just about quantity, it was about quality. These were people who knew how to farm, trade, and fight, a trifecta of skills essential for any burgeoning empire. The empire's expansion wasn't just about waving swords and annexing lands. It was about cultural fusion, a melting pot before melting pots were even cool. The Slavs, the Franks, the Avars, everyone brought a little something to the table. It was like a medieval potluck dinner, except with more chainmail and fewer casseroles. This blend of cultures wasn't just a happy accident. It was a strategy. Maritime understood that a united cultural front could be as powerful as any army. But was Maritime's success all down to his genius, or did he just get lucky? It's tempting to think of him as a medieval mastermind, but there's a simpler truth. He had the right mix of ambition, opportunity, and yes, a bit of luck. He didn't conquer lands with a magic spell, but with a keen eye for opportunity and a knack for knowing when to push and when to pause. Maritime's great Moravian empire was a bit like a medieval startup. It began small, with a founder who had a dream and a determination to make it big. It grew through strategic alliances, clever diplomacy, and a prime location that made it a key player in the region. It was an empire that thrived on a blend of cultures, a testament to the power of unity in diversity. As we wrap up this part of our historical journey, let's not romanticize Maritime too much. He was as much a product of his time as he was a shaper of it. His empire was as fragile as it was formidable, a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we know. So, here's to Maritime, a man who turned a humble cluster of territories into a medieval powerhouse. Whether it was charisma, cunning, or just a lucky roll of history's dice, his legacy is one that continues to captivate us, Wi-Fi and all. As the curtain falls on Maritime's act, the spotlight swings to Rastislav, a ruler who knew that in the high-stakes game of medieval thrones, staying static was as good as writing your own political obituary. Rastislav, Maritime's nephew, took the reins around 846 AD, and he had a vision, one that involved less Frankish interference and more religious autonomy. You see, Rastislav was no fool. He realized that the great Moravian Empire was like a delectable pie eyed hungrily by the Frankish Empire, and he wasn't about to let them take a slice without a fight. So what was Rastislav's big plan? It wasn't just about fortifying castles or rallying troops. No, he aimed to play a more cerebral game, one that involved faith as much as force. Rastislav's strategy was a masterstroke of medieval realpolitik. Invite the Byzantine Empire to send missionaries, thereby reducing the Frankish grip on his territory by diluting their religious influence. Enter Cyril and Methodius, the Byzantine brothers tasked with spreading Christianity, and quite accidentally, creating a whole new alphabet. Talk about overachievers. Now, let's not get too misty-eyed over this seemingly benevolent move. Rastislav's invitation to the Byzantine brothers wasn't just about spiritual enlightenment. Sure, he wanted to save his people's souls, but he was also keen on saving his political skin. Establishing a church independent of Frankish control was like giving the Franks a polite but firm middle finger. Rastislav was playing a game of ecclesiastical chess, and he wanted to make sure he had the upper hand. Cyril and Methodius were a godsend for Rastislav, literally and figuratively. These guys were the avengers of the 9th century religious world, equipped not with capes and superpowers, but with the power of the word, literally. The brothers developed the Glagolitic alphabet, a precursor to Cyrillic, to translate liturgical texts into Old Church Slavonic. This wasn't just an exercise in linguistics. It was a bold stroke of cultural independence. By giving the Slavic people their own script, Cyril and Methodius were doing for the great Moravian Empire what Gutenberg's printing press would eventually do for Europe, empowering the populace through literacy. But before you start imagining Rastislav as a medieval Steve Jobs, remember that his move was as much about survival as it was about innovation. The Frankish Empire, with its sprawling reach and insatiable appetite for control, was like a medieval corporate takeover artist. And Rastislav, savvy ruler that he was, knew that religious independence could act as a bulwark against this aggressive expansion. It was like changing the locks on the cultural kingdom to keep the Franks from simply waltzing in and taking over. Of course, this wasn't just some religious flash mob. It had significant political implications. Aligning with the Byzantine Empire meant Rastislav was playing both sides against the middle, a risky maneuver that could easily backfire. If the Franks were the wolves at the door, the Byzantines were the foxes in the henhouse, and Rastislav had to keep both at bay while maintaining his own grip on power. Rastislav's religious reforms were a bit like buying medieval insurance. They were a calculated risk, aimed at hedging bets against the Frankish threat, but they were also a double-edged sword. While the newfound religious autonomy empowered the Slavic people, it also made the great Moravian Empire a target for Frankish ire. Throw in the Byzantine influence, and you had a recipe for diplomatic fireworks. And what about the brothers, Cyril and Methodius? Their mission was a resounding success, but it came with its own set of complications. The creation of the Glagolitic script was revolutionary, but it also stirred the pot of religious and political tension. The Franks weren't exactly thrilled about losing their spiritual monopoly, and this new script was like a neon sign flashing independence in the middle of a medieval power struggle. Rastislav's gambit worked to a point. His empire enjoyed a brief period of religious and cultural autonomy, but it was a precarious balance. The Frankish Empire wasn't about to roll over and play dead, and the Byzantine Empire had its own agenda. Rastislav had stirred the pot, and the resulting brew was both liberating and volatile. So, was Rastislav a shrewd tactician or a reckless gambler? Spoiler alert, he was a bit of both. His religious reforms were a strategic masterstroke that temporarily kept the Franks at bay. But like any high-stakes game, the odds were never entirely in his favor. Rastislav's legacy is a reminder that in the world of medieval politics, even the boldest moves could lead to a checkmate. His story, like the great Moravian Empire itself, is one of audacity, innovation, and the ever-present specter of risk. As the pages of history turn, Rastislav's daring dance with destiny leaves us with more questions than answers. His moves were a testament to the power of faith, not just in the religious sense, but as a tool of political strategy. Whether he was a visionary or a victim of circumstance, one thing's for sure. Rastislav played a pivotal role in shaping the great Moravian Empire, leaving a legacy as complex as the man himself. And as we inch closer to the next chapter in this epic saga, we're reminded that history is a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, courage, and the occasional risky gamble. Rastislav's daring dance with destiny leaves us pondering the precariousness of medieval politics, a game of thrones where the stakes were high, and the players often had to bluff their way to survival. Enter Svatopluk I, the empire's most ambitious ruler, who took over the reins around 870 AD and steered the great Moravian Empire to its zenith. If Rastislav was the chess player, Svatopluk was the master juggler, keeping multiple balls in the air without dropping any. Well, at least not most of the time. Svatopluk was the kind of guy who'd walk into a room and instead of shaking hands, would size up everyone to see who'd be his next ally or adversary. Under his rule, Great Moravia reached its territorial golden age, stretching far and wide across Central Europe. His knack for diplomacy was legendary, a medieval Houdini who managed to wiggle out of tight spots with strategic alliances, and a poker face that could bluff even the most seasoned diplomat. One of Svatopluk's most impressive feats was managing the complex relationships with the Frankish Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and the Vatican. If Rastislav had been playing ecclesiastical chess, Svatopluk was in a full-blown game of 3D political chess, complete with flaming swords. The Franks were still very much the wolves at the door, and Svatopluk had to be ever cautious with their ambitions. Yet he wasn't just a defensive player. He knew when to go on the offensive, leveraging the Franks' internal squabbles to his advantage, like a master tactician who knew that the best defense is a good offense. And then there were the Byzantines, the sly foxes in the henhouse. Svatopluk smartly realized that while the Byzantines were useful allies in balancing Frankish power, they also had their own agenda. He maintained a delicate balance, playing both empires against each other while keeping a tight grip on his own lands. It was a bit like riding two horses at once, tricky, dangerous, and requiring a keen sense of balance. Not to be outdone in the religious sphere, Svatopluk also managed to keep the Pope in Rome interested. By ensuring that his realm stayed on the good side of the Vatican, he secured papal support, which was as valuable as having a medieval gold card. This wasn't just about religious fervor, it was practical politics. Aligning with the Pope meant that Svatopluk could keep the Frankish bishops at bay and maintain a degree of religious independence. It was a diplomatic ballet that required as much cunning as it did faith. Now, here's where we sprinkle a bit of myth-busting into this tale. There's a romanticized idea of a unified Slavic utopia under Svatopluk's rule, a land of peace, prosperity, and perfect harmony. Spoiler alert, reality was a lot messier. In truth, the Slavic lands were a patchwork of tribes and territories, each with its own leaders and agendas. Svatopluk's empire was less of a united nation and more of a medieval mosaic, held together by his charisma and sometimes brute force. Economically, Svatopluk's reign was a double-edged sword. On one hand, the empire's strategic location made it a hub for trade, with goods flowing in and out like medieval Amazon Prime deliveries. But expansion came at a cost. Maintaining an empire of this size required resources, lots of them. Armies needed to be paid, fortresses maintained, and roads built. If you think modern infrastructure projects are costly, imagine doing it with 9th century technology and a treasury that wasn't exactly overflowing with gold. Speaking of costs, let's not gloss over the human toll. Expansion often meant conflict, and conflict meant casualties. Svatopluk's conquests weren't just grand victories. They were also bloody affairs, with lives lost and communities disrupted. The romantic notion of heroic battles often omits the grim reality of medieval warfare, brutal, bloody, and unforgiving. For every territory gained, there were soldiers who didn't return home, families left to mourn, and lands scarred by the ravages of war. Yet, in all this chaos, Svatopluk managed to leave a lasting legacy. His reign saw the flourishing of Slavic culture, with the continuation of what Cyril and Methodius had started. The Glagolitic script evolved into Cyrillic, and literacy spread like wildfire among the Slavic peoples. This wasn't just about preserving religious texts. It was about empowering an entire culture with the written word. In a time when knowledge was power, Svatopluk's contribution to Slavic literacy was nothing short of revolutionary. But let's not get carried away. Svatopluk's reign wasn't all sunshine and cultural breakthroughs. The empire's expansion brought with it internal strife and external pressures. Managing a sprawling empire was like juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle. It required constant vigilance and a willingness to make hard choices. Sometimes those choices meant betraying allies or enforcing harsh measures to keep the peace. As we look back at Svatopluk's reign, it's tempting to see him as a larger-than-life figure, a medieval hero who brought glory to Great Moravia. But the reality, as always, is more nuanced. Svatopluk was a ruler who played the game of thrones with skill and daring. a man who understood that power was both a gift and a burden. His legacy is a testament to the complexities of leadership, the challenges of empire building, and the ever-present tension between ambition and reality. So, as the story of Svatopluk unfolds, we're left with a portrait of a ruler who was as ambitious as he was astute, a leader who navigated the treacherous waters of medieval politics with a steady hand and a sharp mind. His reign was a high-wire act, a testament to the art of juggling alliances and rivalries in a world where the stakes were as high as the castles he built. And as we leave his chapter open for the next installment, we're reminded that history, much like Svatopluk's empire, is a tapestry woven from ambition, strategy, and the occasional stroke of luck. With Svatopluk's high-wire act nearing its grand finale, we step into the next chapter where the empire's illusion of permanence begins to unravel like a hastily knit sweater. The great Moravian Empire, having reached its zenith under Svatopluk's deft maneuvering, now faced a challenge as old as leadership itself. What happens when the puppeteer lets go of the strings? Svatopluk's death around 894 AD was less a peaceful passing of the torch and more a chaotic scramble for the remaining embers of power. His sons, Maritime II and Svatopluk II, inherited not just a kingdom, but a ticking time bomb of ambition and rivalry. Imagine a medieval version of sibling rivalry, except instead of squabbling over who gets the bigger bedroom, they were bickering over entire regions and armies. Now, the landscape wasn't just dotted with castles and fortresses. It was riddled with fault lines of political tension. Maritime II, the older of the two, took the mantle of leadership, but his brother Svatopluk II was less than thrilled about playing second fiddle. The stage was set for a Shakespearean drama, complete with betrayal, intrigue, and a supporting cast of opportunistic nobles eager to exploit the chaos. But if family feuds weren't enough to sour the empire's fortunes, enter the Hungarians, stage left, with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball at a tea party. These nomadic horsemen, hailing from the Eurasian steppes, were the new kids on the geopolitical block. Their raids were less tactical incursions and more like medieval flash mobs, tearing through the empire's defenses with the efficiency of a well-oiled siege engine. The Hungarians weren't just a bump in the road. They were a full-blown landslide. Let's take a moment to appreciate the geography lesson here. The Carpathians, once the empire's bulwark, now served as a double-edged sword. While they kept some invaders at bay, they also funneled others, like the Hungarians, directly into the heart of Moravia. It was like living in a fortress with a giant welcome mat out front, except the guests were less interested in tea and more in pillaging. So, what went wrong? Was the great Moravian Empire simply too successful for its own good, or was it a victim of bad timing and geography? To answer that, we need to peel back the layers of its decline. Internally, the empire was a house of cards. Svatopluk's ability to juggle alliances and rivalries had masked underlying tensions that were now coming home to roost. Maritime II's reign was fraught with factionalism, as regional lords grew weary of centralized power and began eyeing autonomy. The empire was less a united front and more a patchwork quilt of competing interests, each pulling at the seams. Externally, the political landscape was shifting faster than you could say Byzantine backstab. The Franks, ever the opportunists, saw the internal strife as their golden ticket to meddle. They played the brothers against each other like a game of chess, where every move was calculated to sow discord and weaken the empire. It was a classic divide-and-conquer strategy, and the Franks were playing it to perfection. Economically, the empire was feeling the squeeze. Maintaining a vast territory required resources, something that was running increasingly thin. Trade routes, once bustling arteries of commerce, were now more like clogged veins, thanks in no small part to the Hungarian raids. The cost of defending the empire against these incursions was bleeding the treasury dry. It was as if the empire was living paycheck to paycheck, except the paycheck was in the form of tribute, and the expenses were armies and fortifications. And let's not forget the human cost. The constant state of warfare and the looming threat of invasion took a toll on the populace. Fields lay fallow as farmers were conscripted into makeshift militias, and towns were fortified at the expense of trade and agriculture. The empire's infrastructure, once a testament to its strength, was now a patchwork of makeshift defenses and hastily repaired roads. But perhaps the most insidious factor in the empire's decline was the slow erosion of unity. The very cultural melting pot that had once been its strength was now a source of division. The Slavic tribes, once united under a common banner, were now splintering. Regional identities resurfaced, and the bonds that had held them together under Svatopluk's rule began to fray. In this maelstrom of internal strife and external pressures, the great Moravian Empire found itself on the brink. The Hungarians, like vultures circling a wounded beast, continued their raids, while the Franks gleefully fanned the flames of discord. It was a perfect storm of geopolitical forces, and the empire was caught in the eye of it. So, was the great Moravian Empire's decline inevitable? In hindsight, it's easy to say yes. The empire was a precarious balance of ambition and reality, always teetering on the edge of collapse. Svatopluk's deft handling of affairs had delayed the inevitable, but his death removed the linchpin holding it all together. The empire was a product of its time, a testament to the power of ambition tempered by harsh realities. As we leave this chapter open for the next installment, we're reminded that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we know. The great Moravian Empire's decline is a cautionary tale of ambition unchecked by foresight, of unity undermined by division. It's a reminder that even the mightiest empires are not immune to the forces of history, and that in the Game of Thrones, the only constant is change. But don't tune out just yet. There's more to come. The curtain hasn't fallen on the great Moravian Empire. There's still another act to play. We'll explore the final throes of the empire in the next installment, where the pieces of this grand historical puzzle will finally fall into place. Until then, keep pondering the complexities of medieval politics, and remember, in history, as in life, nothing is ever as simple as it seems. As we step into the closing act of the great Moravian Empire, it's time to sift through the ashes and uncover what remains. You see, while the political entity might have crumbled faster than a medieval cookie, its legacy is a different story altogether. The great Moravian Empire, for all its fleeting glory, left a cultural and religious footprint that left more than just a dent in the historical landscape of Central Europe. And if you're wondering how a defunct empire manages to do that, buckle up because the ride isn't over yet. First, let's talk about cultural influences, the sort that refuses to stay buried in the past. While the empire itself was more of a patchwork quilt held together by a charismatic leader or two, its cultural contributions were, ironically, more cohesive. Consider the Slavic script developed by our old pals Cyril and Methodius. The Glagolitic script may have needed a spelling bee to pronounce, but it laid the foundation for the Cyrillic alphabet, which is, in case you missed the memo, still in use today across vast swaths of Eastern Europe. That's quite the posthumous CV for an empire that technically bit the dust over a millennium ago. Then there's the small matter of religion. The Christianization of the Slavic peoples was a defining feature of the great Moravian Empire, and while Majmir, Rastislav, and Svatopluk might have had their own political agendas, the religious seeds they planted sprouted into a veritable jungle of faith that spread across Central Europe. The Byzantine influence, with its Eastern Orthodox leanings, left a lasting impression, shaping the religious landscape long after the empire itself was history. It's like planting a tree whose roots spread far beyond the original garden, sometimes without permission. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Modern nations like the Czech Republic and Slovakia look back at the great Moravian period with a certain level of nostalgia, almost like flipping through a medieval scrapbook. The empire is often romanticized as a golden age of Slavic unity, a time when the region was a cultural and religious beacon. But let's not kid ourselves. While it's a comforting narrative, the truth was a bit messier. The empire wasn't so much united as it was a coalition of the willing, and occasionally the unwilling, held together by common interests and political necessity. The myths persist because they serve a purpose. Nations, much like people, enjoy a good origin story. It's the narrative equivalent of a comforting bedtime story, complete with heroes, villains, and moral lessons. The great Moravian Empire offers a tale of resilience and innovation, a precursor to national identity that still resonates today. But let's also acknowledge the gritty reality behind the curtains. The empire was as much a tale of sharp political maneuvering and survival as it was about cultural brilliance. So, as we close the book on the great Moravian Empire, we're left with a question as old as history itself. What can we learn from this medieval roller coaster of ambition and innovation? Well, for starters, it's a potent reminder that empires, no matter how grand they appear, are ephemeral. They rise, they fall, and often what remains isn't the political boundaries or the military conquests, but the cultural and religious legacies they leave behind. In the grand chessboard of history, power is transient, but ideas, those have a funny way of sticking around. The story of the great Moravian Empire teaches us that while political power can be as fleeting as a medieval fad, cultural and religious innovations have a knack for outlasting the very institutions that spawned them. It's a testament to the human spirit's ability to adapt, innovate, and leave a mark that defies the passage of time. The empire may have crumbled, but its impact echoes across the ages, a reminder that even in the face of inevitable decline, there's room for lasting influence. And as we drift off into the annals of history, let's ponder this. In a world that often equates power with permanence, perhaps the true legacy of the great Moravian Empire lies not in the territories it once held, but in the ideas it propagated. Ideas that continue to shape nations, foster unity, and remind us that in the end, it's the intangibles, culture, faith, language, that endure long after the last castle falls. So, as you tuck this historical tale away, remember that while empires may vanish, their echoes can resonate for centuries, a testament to the enduring power of cultural innovation amidst the ever-shifting sands of time. The dusty streets of Babylon in 1792 BCE were a far cry from the glittering, mythical city we often imagine. In fact, it was more like a bustling ancient startup town that just needed the right CEO. Enter Hammurabi, not yet the famous Lawgiver, but a relatively unknown prince with big dreams and even bigger ambitions. Babylon was a place ripe for transformation, simmering pot of potential waiting for someone to crank up the heat. It's safe to say that Hammurabi didn't just stroll in and make history. He had to kick down a few metaphorical doors first. Now, Hammurabi wasn't born with a silver sickle in his hand. Unlike today's political dynasties, where being born into the right family might suffice, Hammurabi had to work for his throne. He came to power not by divine right, but through a mix of savvy diplomacy and, let's be honest, a fair share of military muscle. The political climate of Babylon at the time was like the Wild West, minus the cowboys, and plus a lot of clay tablets. This was a place where alliances shifted faster than the Tigris River in flood season. Hammurabi knew that if he wanted to be more than just another name on a list of rulers, he needed allies. And not just any allies. He needed the kind that wouldn't stab him in the back the moment he turned around. So, what was his strategy? Well, think of it as the ancient version of a LinkedIn networking spree. Hammurabi didn't just sit back and hope for the best. He actively sought out partnerships with neighboring city-states, forging alliances that were as much about necessity as they were about strategy. Take, for instance, his alliance with the city of Larsa. This wasn't just a handshake deal over a couple of beers or their Mesopotamian equivalent. It was a carefully calculated move to gain access to trade routes and resources. Larsa had what Babylon needed, namely access to the precious waters of the Euphrates, and in return, Babylon offered military support. It was a win-win, or at least until the winds of politics changed, and alliances needed renegotiation or, in some cases, overthrowing. But of course, alliances can only get you so far in a world where most disputes ended in battle rather than board meetings. Hammurabi understood this, and he wasn't shy about pulling out the big guns when diplomacy reached its limits. He led numerous military campaigns, expanding Babylon's territory and influence far beyond its original borders. By the time he was done, Babylon wasn't just a city. It was a burgeoning empire. This wasn't just a case of flexing military muscles. It was about creating a stable, unified realm that could support his grand vision. While Hammurabi was busy playing chess with neighboring states, the social and economic conditions in Babylon were also shifting. The city was growing, both in size and significance, and with growth came the usual suspects: economic disparity, social unrest, and the need for order. Let's face it, ancient cities weren't exactly known for their urban planning or social services. Babylon's streets were a chaotic mix of merchants, farmers, and craftsmen, each with their own set of problems and grievances. The economy was heavily dependent on agriculture, with the Euphrates providing the necessary irrigation to keep fields fertile. But it wasn't just about growing crops. Trade was the lifeline of Babylon, connecting it to distant lands and cultures. Hammurabi saw this interconnectedness as both an opportunity and a challenge. He recognized that for Babylon to thrive, it needed not just laws, but a system that could handle the complexities of an expanding economy and diverse population. Hammurabi's rise was not just about personal ambition. It was about recognizing and seizing the opportunity to shape a city that was ready to burst with potential. He didn't become Babylon's lawgiver because he was the most charismatic or because he had the most illustrious lineage. He earned his place by understanding the intricate web of politics, economics, and society. He was the right guy at the right time, with the right skills to transform Babylon from a relatively unknown dart on the Mesopotamian map into a central hub of culture and power. In the coming parts of his life story, we'll see how Hammurabi's laws didn't just lay down the rules for Babylon. They set the stage for how societies would function for centuries to come. But for now, let's appreciate the gritty, ambitious beginnings of a prince who didn't just inherit a throne. He built an empire. So, Hammurabi had set the stage for something big, a city on the brink of becoming an empire, itching for a set of rules to match its ambitions. Enter the Code of Hammurabi, arguably the ancient world's version of a viral TikTok. Imagine it, a towering black stone stele over 7 feet tall, covered in Akkadian cuneiform. This wasn't just a legal document, it was a monument. It was like Hammurabi screaming from the rooftops, "Hey, world, here's how we do things in Babylon." And let's be honest, the guy knew how to work the ancient PR machine. You couldn't exactly scroll past this on your daily commute. Now, let's talk about the star of the show, the 282 laws. Forget about the Magna Carta for a minute. Hammurabi's code was the original legal blockbuster. It wasn't just about theft or murder. It covered everything from trade regulations to family law. It was the Swiss Army knife of legal codes, designed to handle the complexities of Babylon's booming economy and diverse population. Remember, Babylon wasn't just a city. It was a bustling hub of commerce and culture. And as any city slicker knows, more people equals more problems. The code famously kicks off with a prologue that reads like Hammurabi's own TED talk about justice. It's a mix of self-congratulation and divine endorsement, boasting that the gods themselves appointed him to bring order and fairness. If you think modern politicians have egos, they're merely walking in Hammurabi's shadow. But let's be clear, this wasn't all hot air. These laws were serious business, and they covered an impressive array of topics. From property rights to liability laws, Hammurabi was on it. And yes, there's the infamous eye for an eye bit, which sounds more like a Quentin Tarantino plot point than a legal doctrine. But wait, there's nuance here. This principle of retributive justice wasn't about encouraging barbarism. It was about setting limits on vengeance. Think of it as Hammurabi's way of saying, let's keep the vendettas within reason, folks. Before you get any ideas about Hammurabi being some kind of ancient Robin Hood, bear in mind that his laws were a bit more, let's say, stratified. Justice in Babylon was a sliding scale, heavily influenced by social status. If a nobleman knocked out another nobleman's tooth, it was tooth for tooth, no questions asked. But if a nobleman knocked out a commoner's tooth, it was more like tooth for fine. Different strokes for different folks, as they say, but this time with actual strokes involved. So why carve these laws into a massive stone stele? Picture it as the ancient equivalent of putting your terms and conditions on a public billboard instead of burying them in fine print. It was a move of transparency and authority, saying, this is how we roll in Babylon, and everyone better take note. Plus, in a world where literacy was a luxury and paper was basically a figment of the future, stone was the way to go if you wanted your message to endure. This wasn't just about governance, it was about legacy. Hammurabi wanted his laws, and by extension, his reign to be etched into the fabric of history, quite literally. But let's not get too misty-eyed about the grandeur of it all. While the code is often celebrated as a beacon of ancient justice, it's worth remembering that this was a system designed to maintain order in a way that favored the elite. The laws were as much about consolidating power as they were about fairness. Hammurabi's vision was one where the state held the ultimate authority, and the steel was its symbol, standing tall in the heart of Babylon like a monolith of power and control. In comparing Hammurabi's code to modern legal systems, it's fascinating to see both the parallels and the chasms. Sure, the eye for an eye approach might seem archaic today, but the idea of laws being publicly accessible and universally applied, that's a cornerstone of justice systems around the globe. Hammurabi set a precedent by codifying laws, making them available to anyone who could decipher cuneiform on a good day. The transparency was revolutionary, even if the content was sometimes brutal by today's standards. And let's not forget the economic context. Babylon was no sleepy backwater. It was an economic powerhouse. The laws reflected the complexity of its economy, addressing everything from the wages of ox drivers to the responsibilities of tavern keepers. Trade was the lifeblood of Babylon, and these laws were the arteries through which it flowed. They standardized weights and measures, regulated contracts, and even detailed the proper conduct for merchants. In a world where the wrong measure of grain could spark a dispute, this was crucial. So, was Hammurabi the great lawgiver he's often painted as? Well, yes and no. He was a shrewd politician who understood that control wasn't just about swords and soldiers. It was about creating a framework where people knew the rules of the game. But he was also a ruler who saw the utility in laws that reinforced social hierarchies. He wasn't crafting utopia. He was managing a burgeoning empire. As we continue to explore Hammurabi's legacy in the next parts, it's clear that his code was more than just a set of rules. It was a reflection of a society at the crossroads of ambition and reality. Hammurabi's Babylon was a land of opportunity, but also of stark inequalities, and his laws were both a product of their time and a step towards a more structured future. While we've only just scratched the surface of Hammurabi's impact, one thing is certain. His laws laid the groundwork for how societies could be organized, even as they revealed the complexities of power and justice in a world not so different from our own. And so, as Babylon's skyline began to rise under Hammurabi's watchful eye, it wasn't just about laws etched in stone. The city itself was a testament to his vision, a bricks-and-mortar manifesto that screamed, "Here lies the heart of an empire." But before we get too misty-eyed, let's remember that Hammurabi's urban planning was less about aesthetic harmony and more about pragmatic survival. Picture a city that's more concrete jungle than hanging gardens, with irrigation projects and infrastructure to match. Now, when we say irrigation projects, we're not talking about a couple of ditches dug by a few overzealous farmers. Hammurabi took on the Tigris and Euphrates as if he were a maestro conducting a symphony of water channels and canals. This was no small feat. We're talking about miles of canals that could have made even the most seasoned civil engineer break a sweat. These waterways were the arteries that kept Babylon alive, turning arid lands into fertile oases. It was like Hammurabi was playing guard with a shovel, redirecting rivers to breathe life into the very soil of his empire. And he didn't just stop at building them. He had the foresight to maintain them. You see, back then, a neglected canal could spell disaster faster than a royal scandal. Flooding wasn't just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat. But Hammurabi didn't stop at irrigation. His domestic policies were also about fortifying Babylon, ensuring it could withstand both time and tide. Enter the city walls, Babylon's answer to the age-old problem of keeping the neighbors at bay. These weren't just any walls, mind you. They were massive, imposing structures that would make even the Great Wall of China nod in approval. The walls were said to be so wide that a chariot, yes, a full-blown, horse-drawn chariot, could easily ride atop them. Talk about taking defensive architecture to a new level. It was the ancient equivalent of a "Do Not Disturb" sign, and it worked brilliantly. But imagine the paperwork involved. Bureaucracy was as much a part of Hammurabi's Babylon as the bricks in those city walls. Coordinating labor, resources, and logistics for such grand projects required a system that could rival any modern-day red tape. Hammurabi essentially invented the ancient version of a planning committee, complete with its own share of bureaucratic headaches. It's almost comforting to know that even 4,000 years ago, people were probably complaining about permits and zoning laws. Hammurabi also understood that a city wasn't just a collection of buildings. It was a living organism that needed spaces for its people to gather, worship, and, well, do whatever ancient Babylonians did in their downtime. Cue the construction of public buildings and temples. These structures weren't just places of worship or administration. They were symbols of the state's power and benevolence. By investing in these public spaces, Hammurabi was doing more than just playing city planner. He was cementing his legacy as a ruler who cared about the social and cultural fabric of his city. Speaking of culture, let's not forget that Babylon was a melting pot long before New York made it trendy. This was a city where traders, scholars, and travelers converged, bringing with them a mosaic of beliefs and practices. Navigating these cultural and religious shifts required a deft hand, and Hammurabi had just the right touch. He didn't just impose his will. He adapted, incorporated, and sometimes even tolerated different traditions. It was a delicate dance of diplomacy that ensured stability in a diverse society. Of course, this wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. There were tensions, as you'd expect in any bustling metropolis. Religious and cultural clashes were part of the deal, and Hammurabi had to be both king and diplomat. He understood that religion was as much a tool of governance as it was a spiritual refuge. By aligning himself with the priesthood and ensuring that Babylon's patron god, Marduk, was adequately revered, Hammurabi shored up his divine right to rule. It was a political masterstroke, ensuring that the gods, and by extension their followers, were on his side. So, while Hammurabi's Babylon might not have had skyscrapers or Wi-Fi, it was a thriving, complex urban center that stood as a testament to his vision and leadership. It wasn't just about keeping the lights on. It was about creating a city that could endure the sands of time. And as we've seen, this required more than just grandiose plans. It needed a ruler who could see the bigger picture while still sweating the small stuff. In the grand tapestry of history, Hammurabi's domestic policies and urban planning efforts may not get the same spotlight as his famous code of laws, but they were no less vital in sculpting the city's destiny. They reveal a ruler who was as much a visionary as he was a pragmatist, someone who understood that the strength of an empire lay not just in its swords and soldiers, but in its foundations, both literal and metaphorical. As we delve further into his legacy, it's clear that Hammurabi's impact reached far beyond his own time, setting a precedent for how cities and societies could be organized, managed, and sustained. But for now, let's leave Babylon standing tall, a testament to one man's ambition and a beacon of what's to come. As Babylon stood tall, a testament to Hammurabi's ambition, let's swivel our gaze beyond the city walls to the broader Mesopotamian neighborhood, where the stakes were raised higher than a ziggurat. Here, Hammurabi played a game of ancient risk, where the winner didn't just take a few territories, they built empires. Babylon's expansion wasn't an overnight sensation. It was a carefully orchestrated opera of alliances, warfare, and probably a few sleepless nights. Now, Hammurabi wasn't content to sit on his laurels, admiring Babylon's skyline. Nope, he had his eyes on the prize, regional dominance. The thing is, Mesopotamia wasn't just a land of milk and honey. It was more like a land of mud and grudges. City-states were constantly at each other's throats, and alliances were as stable as a sandcastle in a sandstorm. Enter Hammurabi, who knew that to make Babylon a heavyweight, he needed to build a coalition of the willing, or at least the temporarily agreeable. Hammurabi's foreign policy was less about peace treaties and more about power reallocation. He was like the kid on the playground who knew how to make friends with the bullies, only to outsmart them later. Take the case of Mari, a city-state that once thought it could stand on its own 2 feet. Hammurabi first cozied up to Mari, offering the classic, "You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours" deal. But as soon as Mari blinked, Hammurabi swung in with a military campaign in 1761 BCE that turned Mari's independence into a distant memory. It was strategic brilliance wrapped in a cloak of diplomacy. And it wasn't just Mari. Hammurabi had a knack for identifying opportunities where others saw only obstacles. He famously took on Larsa, another regional competitor, in a campaign that was as much about reclaiming Babylonian pride as it was about territorial gain. In 1763 BCE, the armies of Babylon marched south, and just like that, Larsa's sovereignty became a footnote in history. These conquests weren't just military victories, they were economic windfalls. With Larsa under Babylonian control, the Euphrates trade routes were essentially Hammurabi's personal freeway, tolls included. Now, let's not romanticize this too much. The brutality of these campaigns wasn't lost on anyone. Sieges were the ancient equivalent of a hostile takeover, complete with starvation and destruction. But Hammurabi understood that, in a world where might often made right, his military campaigns were necessary evils. He wasn't playing a zero-sum game. He was playing to win, and win he did. The thing about becoming a regional powerhouse is that it doesn't just bring accolades, it brings headaches. For every city Hammurabi conquered, there were others watching with wary eyes, sharpening their swords. Elam, a potent force to the southeast, was one such neighbor that Hammurabi had to keep in check. This required more than just brute force. It required cunning diplomacy. You see, Elam had ambitions of its own, and Hammurabi couldn't afford to have them breathing down Babylon's neck. So, what did Hammurabi do? He showed that sometimes the pen, or the cuneiform stylus, in this case, could indeed be mightier than the sword. By forging treaties and establishing tribute systems, he managed to keep Elam at bay without engaging in full-blown war, at least for a time. It was a masterclass in realpolitik, where Hammurabi wielded power not with reckless abandon, but with calculated finesse. But let's talk about those alliances. They were like ancient prenups, great while they lasted, but prone to messy breakups. Hammurabi knew that allegiances could be as fickle as the Mesopotamian weather. Take the case of Eshnunna, a city-state that found itself on the wrong side of Hammurabi's ambitions. Initially an ally, Eshnunna's strategic location made it too tempting for Hammurabi to resist. When the winds changed, so did his loyalties, leading to another Babylonian conquest in 1762 BCE. It was a classic case of it's not personal, it's just politics. And speaking of politics, Hammurabi was a maestro of manipulation, playing city-states against each other like pieces on a board. His alliances were often temporary, only as steadfast as the next opportunity for expansion. But isn't that the essence of politics? A dance of convenience, where today's friend could be tomorrow's foe. Hammurabi understood this better than most, and his ability to pivot when needed was what set him apart. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about Babylon's rise. Rival city-states saw Hammurabi's Babylon as a behemoth that needed to be contained. It was a classic case of power dynamics, where the rise of one often meant the suppression of others. Yet, Hammurabi managed to maintain an air of legitimacy, a perception bolstered by the divine right he so cleverly wielded. His reign was seen as ordained by the gods, which, in a world where divine favor was the ultimate endorsement, was as good as it got. The economic implications of Hammurabi's campaigns were profound. Control over strategic locations meant control over trade routes, and control over trade routes meant wealth. Babylon became the economic hub of Mesopotamia, a bustling center where goods flowed like the Euphrates itself. This wasn't just about accumulating wealth, it was about ensuring Babylon's survival and prosperity. The city had become a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and goods, its markets reflecting the diversity of Hammurabi's empire. But let's not kid ourselves. This expansion wasn't an exercise in benevolence. Conquered territories were often subjected to Babylonian rule, their resources redirected to fill Babylon's coffers. It was colonialism, ancient style, and while it brought prosperity to Babylon, it often left a trail of resentment. Hammurabi might have been a visionary, but he was also a conqueror, and those two identities rarely make for a harmonious blend. Yet, perhaps the most remarkable aspect of Hammurabi's foreign policy was his ability to maintain control over such a diverse empire. It wasn't just about military might or economic prowess. It was about governance. Hammurabi implemented a system of vassal states, allowing local rulers to maintain a semblance of power under Babylonian oversight. It was a smart move, ensuring that while Babylon's influence expanded, its administrative burden didn't spiral out of control. As the dust settled on Hammurabi's military campaigns, Babylon stood not just as a city, but as a symbol of ambition and power. It was a testament to Hammurabi's strategic acumen and his unyielding drive to expand Babylon's influence. Yet, even as Babylon's reach extended across Mesopotamia, the challenges of maintaining such an empire loomed large. Hammurabi had set the stage for a new era, one defined by the balance of power, diplomacy, and the ever-present threat of conflict. So, While the romantic image of Hammurabi as the benevolent lawgiver endures, it's worth remembering the grit and determination that fueled his rise. He wasn't just a ruler, he was an architect of empire, a figure whose legacy was built on both the glory of conquest and the harsh realities of power. And as we move forward in his story, it's clear that Hammurabi's Babylon was more than just a city. It was the epicenter of a world in transition, where the echoes of his reign would resonate for centuries to come. As we move forward in Hammurabi's story, it's clear that his Babylon was more than a mere city. It was the epicenter of a world in transition, a place where the echoes of his reign would resonate for centuries to come. But let's peel back the layers of the man who crafted this legacy and delve into why. Of all the kings whose names have drifted into historical oblivion, Hammurabi still rings through the ages. Why does Hammurabi's name endure while others have crumbled like ancient ruins? Well, for starters, let's not underestimate the power of good branding. The Code of Hammurabi wasn't just a legal document. It was an ancient PR masterstroke. Here was a king who etched his laws into stone, ensuring his legacy was as durable as the medium itself. While other rulers were content with clay tablets that could be smashed like an antique iPhone, Hammurabi opted for a 7-foot stele, the ancient equivalent of a billboard. It was a move that screamed, "I'm not just here for a good time, but a long time." But there's more to it than just durable rock and clever marketing. Hammurabi's real genius lay in understanding the power of law as a tool for governance. His code provided a framework for a society that was rapidly becoming more complex and interconnected. With 282 laws covering everything from theft to family rights, Hammurabi didn't just lay down rules. He laid down the foundations for a society where people could conduct business, resolve disputes, and know their rights, at least if they were on the right side of the social ladder. Was it perfect? Not by a long shot, but it was revolutionary for its time, and that's a legacy that tends to stick. Now, though Hammurabi might have been the poster child for ancient lawgivers, let's not ignore the murkier side of his reign. The myth of Hammurabi as a benevolent ruler glosses over the stark realities of his empire. His laws were as much about maintaining control as they were about ensuring justice. They reinforced social hierarchies and often favored the elite, a feature not exactly unique to Babylon, but certainly notable. Yet, in a world where rulers often governed with sheer force, Hammurabi's emphasis on written laws was a step, albeit a small one, toward a more structured society. But what happens to an empire when its architect is no longer at the helm? Hammurabi might have been able to hold Babylon together with his iron grip, both literally and figuratively, but the sands of time are relentless. After his death in 1750 BCE, the empire he meticulously built began to unravel. Like a sandcastle left to face the tide, Babylon's fortunes started to wane without its master strategist. Political instability crept in, and the alliances Hammurabi had so deftly navigated began to fracture. The once mighty city-state found itself grappling with internal dissent and external threats. It was a classic case of entropy in action, as the forces of decay set in faster than you can say, divine mandate. And let's not sugarcoat it. The decline was swift. Within a few generations, Babylon was no longer the powerhouse it once was. It was like watching a blockbuster movie that suddenly switches directors mid-scene. The successors of Hammurabi couldn't maintain the empire's cohesion, and by the time the Hittites came knocking in 1595 BCE, Babylon was ripe for the taking. The city fell, a shadow of its former glory, and Hammurabi's legacy seemed destined to be just another footnote in the annals of history. Yet, even as Babylon crumbled, the echoes of Hammurabi's reign continued to ripple through time. His laws, copied and adapted by subsequent cultures, laid the groundwork for legal systems that spanned the ancient world. The stele itself, discovered in 1901 by a team of French archaeologists in Susa, modern-day Iran, became a symbol of legal tradition. It was like finding the Rosetta Stone of justice, a key to understanding the evolution of law and order from antiquity to the present day. So why does Hammurabi's life still matter in today's legal and cultural landscape? Well, for one, his code offers a glimpse into the complexities of ancient societies and the perennial issues of justice and governance. It's a reminder that while societies change, the fundamental challenges of creating order and fairness remain. It's like a historical mirror, reflecting our own struggles and triumphs in building equitable systems. Moreover, Hammurabi's code has become a cultural touchstone, a shorthand for the concept of justice itself. Even if you've never read a single line of cuneiform, you've likely heard the phrase, an eye for an eye, a testament to the code's enduring impact. It's a phrase that's been debated, dissected, and in many cases misunderstood. While it often conjures images of brutal retribution, its original intent was to establish limits on vengeance, a nuance that's as relevant today as it was nearly 4 millennia ago. And let's not forget the broader economic and social context. Hammurabi's Babylon was a city that thrived on trade and cultural exchange, its streets a bustling mosaic of ideas and influences. This cosmopolitan spirit, fueled by well-defined laws, became a template for future cities and civilizations. It's a reminder that diversity and commerce can be powerful engines of progress when harnessed with a clear rule of law. As we wrap up our exploration of Hammurabi's life and legacy, it's clear that he was more than just another king in a long line of rulers. He was a visionary who understood the power of law, the importance of infrastructure, and the art of diplomacy in shaping an empire. His story is a testament to the enduring human quest for justice, order, and meaning in an ever-changing world. In the end, Hammurabi's life is a captivating blend of romance and reality. The romance of a king who dared to dream big and etch his vision into the annals of history. The reality of a ruler navigating the harsh truths of power, politics, and human nature. And while Babylon may have faded, the lessons of Hammurabi's reign continue to resonate, offering insights and inspiration for those who dare to dream of a better world. So there you have it, a tale of ambition, legacy, and the timeless dance between law and power, etched in stone and echoed through the ages.